I'd like to call the meeting to order. We have an agenda in front of us. Do you have any adjustments to the agenda? Move to approve. Could I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right.
Want to take over?
Yes, sir. Good morning, Mayor, Council. Morning. Here this morning, obviously, to go over the budget, and this is considered
I don't know what,
FY 24-25 budget workshop presentation. And just had some initial comments before we get started. If you bear with me. This is considered a workshop of the village council and working with staff who will provide some level of detail in the presentation to spur questions and answers as it relates to specific items included in the proposed budget that are related to personnel, operating, debt, capital, and items. And so the goal of the workshop is for staff to receive direction from you all in finalizing the draft budget for the purposes of the public hearing that'll be held at the May 19th council meeting. In addition to the presentation slides, you also have, for reference, included in your workshop booklets, the FY 25 budget spreadsheets for the general fund, the utilities fund, in addition to the BRAT fund and stormwater fund. And the requested numbers included in the spreadsheets are basically summarized in the slides that I'm going to go through to give you sort of a high level, big picture. And then, as we go through them, feel free to ask questions and we can drill down as detailed as we need to respond to the questions. Leading up to this workshop, department heads were given their workbooks, guidance in February, just prior to the council retreat. And since then, I've had meetings with the finance director and village manager that has culminated in the draft you will see this morning. This also takes into consideration, to the extent possible, inclusion of priorities that were discussed at the council retreat. And as an example, contractor services yard, and the reference of trying to get that completed. Also, to the extent possible, giving ongoing legal efforts related to the transportation system. This year's process has been challenged again. We're trying to create a budget that will cover potential expenses beyond the costs of carrying out the day-to-day mission. While there are yet again funds included for legal expenses, the proposed budget includes increases in personnel and operating costs across all departments, in addition to some number of requested capital items. And last, just to recognize that budgets are a best estimate as of today and provide guidance and direction with spending throughout the fiscal year starting July 1st, 2024 through June 30th of 2025. Note that any unexpended revenues left at the end of the fiscal year will be transferred into the village's fund balance. Later in the presentation, Zach will provide some future projections using our new financial model as it relates to trying to replenish that fund balance. All right, so we're going to move into the general fund. This would be slide 5, which is the proposed general fund expenditures. So this slide identifies the proposed expenditures by department and the difference between the FY 23 actual, the FY 24 budget, and current fiscal year estimated expenses through June 30, and the requested expenditure for FY 25. Also shown as the change from the FY 24 budget, and 2 years ago now, we added the last column to show the change from the estimated expenses within the current fiscal year. So I'm just going to go over some points of emphasis on this particular slide. Again, this might spur some questions, but just to acknowledge the total requested budget for FY 25 is 17.3 million. This is an overall increase from the current FY 24 budget of 1.9 million, which is a 12% increase. Some noted increases in various departments. The total personnel increase of $456,000, which is 7%. And this includes a 4% COLA and up to a 4% merit increase for top performers. On the operating increases, approximately 1.2 million, or 26%. Administration, we've included 540,000 for a legal line for ROFR. Public safety, 41,000 for hydrant maintenance. Shoreline protection, 126,000, of which portion of that will be for the Oak Island monitoring required of our CAMA permit. Work effort on the Wilmington Harbor Navigation Channel deepening and the Frying Pan Shoal Bar site permit renewal effort. In IT, there's a number of software systems looking to implement, approximately 59,000. It includes software for the public safety on the law enforcement side, and then the fire and EMS side. And then moving into HR, 19,000 for professional services, investing in our leadership with supervisory leadership training. Public Works, 62,000 for an increase in our GFL contract for solid waste residential collection. And contractor services, 100,000 for the contractor services, yard improvements, fencing, gated access, and stormwater basin installation. I'll note there is not a road paving project budgeted for this year again. However, we did include 20,000 for sidewalk repairs. And I would note there are other funds within the Public Works budget, you'll see later, that within our right-of-way maintenance to complete needed repairs and patching through the year. Also to acknowledge the village has submitted a congressional district funding request for 6.7 million for a comprehensive road paving project if that earmark is approved. All right, any questions so far?
Yeah, Chris, I have a question. Obviously, legal expenses, a big concern to folks. We heard that last week and you noted in your comments there that we're allocating another $540,000 for the Gopher litigation. Can you give us some insight into how we came up with that as a budget number? Because just where we are at this stage of litigation, that number would strike me as high.
Yeah. So Zach and the mayor had a follow-up call with Charles, after we had met on Tuesday to
Yep.
try to drill down on that. I would say based out of the conversations that, the number and how we're approaching the legal fees it's a challenge, obviously.
Sure.
Because, you can't necessarily predict to what extent any one of those cases is going to go. And so to your point about trying to narrow down with a single cost for everything, it's not that we didn't come away with that out of that meeting. The 540,000 was, I would say, was what we estimated to, and in the hopes that if legal challenges don't go certain ways, that we wouldn't have to expend that money.
Sure.
We go back into the fund balance.
Yeah.
Mayor, do you want to?
Yeah, I think that the big issue, and it's a horrible issue, but you get down to it, it's like, well, you look at the past year, you look at each case that's pending and where we stand with them. And, what we've found is that, there's still a volatility about all these cases that, you're even, as an example, not the Rofer case, but the sub 21, we're looking at like, gosh, there can't be any more money that has to be spent on that. It's, it's been,
And
it's been heard,
the
it's been
Rofer case
appealed.
too. Yeah.
Pardon me?
And the Rofer case too. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been appealed and we're just waiting for a decision. I don't know that when we come out of that decision that there might be a reprimand or some reason that it doesn't go back to court again. So the idea that, we can predict, there is volatility about all of them that is hard to predict. And so when we're looking at, the hard part with this is, like, so I don't want to spend that money again on legal. And it's like, nobody does, but I also don't want to get to, I'd rather get to the end of the year and say, oh, we didn't spend it. Oh, great. It goes into the general fund. And I think in the past, our history in this village has been to not prepare, not to anticipate expenses going over, and instead hitting the general fund. And I think last year was, I don't want to say it's the first year, but it was the first year that I remember that we were looking at our budget and saying, look, we don't know what's going to happen, but we got to have money in there to cover it. We can't just keep on borrowing against a credit card that we don't have. And so the numbers that are associated with legal right now, I think they're probably high. But I also don't want to be looking at it, looking at it, so, well, we screwed up.
Yeah, I'd certainly hope they're high just because of the nature of litigation, right? When we're at the appellate stage, we're not going back through discovery and depositions and all those things that we should have already incurred. But to see that, and it's not you guys, I mean, obviously you don't make the estimate on it, but I think we need to push back on our council more. It's just imprudent to keep moving forward and have, kind of shrugging and going, we have no idea how much this is going to cost. That's a very normal thing to ask of our council to say, you got to give us some kind of estimate that is within the ballpark, because we can't keep missing it by tenfold and then double digit tax.
Yeah, I think
increases to
that-
everybody.
I
You're an
think,
attorney, so if you were to do that, then spell out what you think that would look like, or what that would sound like.
What do you mean?
Act like you're Charles Baldwin and
Yeah.
estimate what you think the legal fees would be for. I mean,
It's the same thing that we talk about every time. I would have a conversation about a realistic probability of outcome.
Mhm.
I would talk about what I think litigation expenses are going to be
Mhm.
in that and give you some kind of confidence interval.
Right.
And we're not operating with that right now, right? These guys not to their fault are just kind of going, well, that's what we paid last year.
yeah,
Just where the nature of the litigation is, there's absolutely no way we should be incurring the same amount as what we did before. So then to your point, Peter, okay, so then if this budget exercise is the absolute high number, I don't think that's the right way to go about budgeting either, because we said this was going to be our best estimate on what we think things are going to be. And to date, we just haven't gotten any of that assurance or feedback from our council as far as what they think those expenses are going to be or where the end is in sight, And so, again, I would, push back on that. And I think, we need to, it's the only vendor we do business with where we go, we have absolutely no idea what we're going to pay. None.
I would add a couple of thoughts to this, though.
Yeah.
They've done a good job. They're excellent counsel.
I'm not questioning
They're
that.
doing it for us at reduced rates. Then they substantially reduced rates,
How would we know that, Jenny?
because I know you can find out what their regular rate is and what they're charging us.
We don't review those invoices.
Well, Chris is back at them and, they're aware. I know that they go through the invoices and look at them for reasonableness and for result before sending the bill out. So I think that they're playing fairly with us.
Yeah, I don't mean to insinuate that. I'm just saying the predictability of the expense is not there.
Well, part of it is that in any litigation, the other side can file frivolous claims and can appeal them. That happens, and people incur costs defending against that. And we don't know all that transportation and limited and sharp view are going to do. So you can't look into a crystal ball and say, well, this is what's going to happen. You really don't know.
to your question though, it's like, well, maybe I'm misreading it, but I'm reading that you're implying that we haven't had that conversation. And as a council, we haven't had that conversation. I've had that conversation with them a number of times.
Okay.
And I know that in our conversations with, we have our legal team, and Scott and I have been meeting with the legal team on a regular basis. And in those conversations, there's never a time that we go by and say, well, what's our chances of winning this? Or what's our chances of not winning this? Should we stop? That conversation happens all the time. And so it might not be in our general meetings, and it might not even be in session, only because it's not being asked every single time we have a closed session. But it has been a question that was asked for, I don't think it was asked the last meeting, but I know last year, it was like, we didn't get through a meeting without, I was like, wait a minute, stop. What's our chance of winning this case? What's the impact of winning, of not winning it? And what's our chances? Those are normal questions that happen. And if you feel like those questions haven't been asked, then open your mouth during closed session and ask.
I will.
In terms of, there's some things that we do have when we're talking about, and Jenny's saying there's a discounted rate or a municipal rate. We've been dealing with Brooks Pierce for 20 years now. And there is a level of trust between the village and Brooks Pierce and general conversations. We're not looking through line item billing from them. I mean, that is, I'm not sure exactly what gets provided.
I would think they would do that. Yeah.
Yeah, but there is a level of trust and I'm not at that.
Yeah, don't confuse the point. I'm not inferring in any way that the billing is inappropriate or, that's not it. This is more about our duty here to come up with a predictability of expense for the people that we're saying you have to pay for it. And we just went through this, cycle last year, right? For the first time, we put the contingency in. And Jenny, I know you and I sparred over this and we said, that's a legal fund. It is. Right. And he said, no, it's if for something that's unforeseen. And here we are a year later and that's played out. It's basically been a legal fund. It's been a legal fund in a roof patch. And so, we just need to be transparent and clear with folks. What do we think we're going to spend on it and get it within, some degree of certainty, because otherwise, I think people are going to continue to be unhappy with, these kind of asks when they don't have any predictability about the result. That's all. So I'd renew my request too. I think it would be helpful as we report this out to report legal expense like we do IT or HR. It's another administrative expense, and then people, and they don't have to dig into the line items and parse it out, right? And so then just from a transparency standpoint, I think it makes it clear for everybody what's there and what's not, right? And I think that just helps with having the conversation about accurate data.
All right, noted. I did discuss with Charles about, trying to hone in on a all-inclusive price, if you will. Yeah. There was some concerns with that, they could build in the level of risk if things went awry, if things got reprimanded, they might tend to build in the risk in that.
And we discussed, so we discussed this pretty intensely, and I think, my experience, and it's obviously totally different field, but if you're dealing with contracts in general, they can eat up the risk and we can be asking, hey, hone it down, let's get the number. And they're asking, well, I don't know what's going to happen, so I'm going to have to throw this into the number too. They're going to build the insurance policy based on their side.
Sure.
And where we are right now is actually, right now, I think it's more in the open in terms of like, this is how much we're allocating for this. And we're not lying to ourselves. Maybe it won't come up to this height, but it's in our budget as opposed to in their books.
I'd say some years ago when we filed the lawsuit against the Corps back in 2009, that carried all the way up to the 4th District Court. that we incurred significant, at the time, significant legal fees in excess of $1 million in that effort. And I don't recall any way to try that we tried to hold them to a specific contractual cost for that, because we didn't know that would end up going to the Fourth Circuit.
Yeah.
But ultimately it did, and unfortunately we lost, but that's just another experience that the village has had when it comes to legal.
Fair enough.
Let's be clear that it's not all legal fees. It's built into the legal budget. All the consulting fees get billed through the lawyers.
Sure.
And we've incurred financial advice and other consulting fees that are kept within the circle of litigation for confidentiality reasons.
Sure.
All right.
And Chris, this is just a nitpicky thing for people who maybe don't understand. When the court sends something back, that's a remand. It's not a reprimand.
I'm sorry.
It's a
Remand. I'm sorry.
Thank you for,
You can't
It's a reprimand.
you can't let them ride.
They did wrong.
It's a reprimand when your mom sends you back.
Yeah.
And again, to be clear, if it's a utilities commission case, it is remanded back to the commission. If it's like in the case of the ROFR, a legal issue, it's remanded back to courts to.
Yeah, the court of original jurisdiction. Yeah.
We're playing legal games or legal issues in two different environments, regulatory and legal.
yeah, and to that point, just to acknowledge, those items, but, still appealing or waiting for outcomes of appeals on within the NCUC with the regulatory of parking and barge, the approval of the transfer to Sharpview, and then the recent petition to revise the ferry schedule that's all encompassing in the transportation legal line, which we funded or included in that budget line, $540,000.
Last year, we didn't anticipate having to intervene in a ferry schedule issue. Last year, we didn't realize we're gonna have to intervene or
And again, Scott, that's a choice we made, right? We don't necessarily have to intervene on the ferry schedule issue, right?
I hear you, Scott, but what if we need to?
Okay, what
We
if?
don't know whether we're gonna have to until an issue pops up.
You're right. But again, let's revisit. So with the ferry schedule issue,
Mhm.
right? We had this conversation, talking about it. The utility accepted the fact that they got so many individual public comments and they gave a nod towards we're going to have a public hearing on it,
Mhm.
I would say is a very positive sign from the regulator because they don't usually take that much credit for individual comments, right? It usually does take a municipality or somebody to bring the big stick to the table before they're willing, to engage in that. So by virtue of the fact that they already went down that path and said, yeah, we hear you, the 94 folks that stepped up and said we have an issue with that, I think is a pretty good tell that they're already in our camp on that. So, yeah, I mean, reasonable minds could differ on that. I think it's excessive to jump into that one as well,
Fair enough.
right?
I would argue that if there's a settlement opportunity for us not to have a seat at the table to determine what those settlement stipulations are, would be foolish.
Yeah, on the rate case, I don't think it's that big of an issue. I think it's going to be a done deal. But again, reasonable minds could differ on that, but I guess I want to be careful about positing like, oh, we had to get in on that. No, we took a vote, right, in here and, and again, reasonable minds can differ, but we didn't have to get into that litigation. We didn't have to expend any of that money, right? That was a choice that we made, right? And it wasn't in response to litigation that was already out there.
Okay, then let's talk about the commission's request for input on how to regulate ferries.
Mhm.
Okay, that's silent on that.
Yep.
But limited in transportation, their input into that issue was you don't need to regulate ferries at all, Utilities Commission. Could you imagine?
Yeah.
Operating a ferry system to Bald Head Island and back without the North Carolina Utilities Commission?
I agree.
Oversight on rates and
I agree.
service?
On that one, then I think, yeah, we certainly interject and we've intervened on that one, right? So I think we have common ground on that one. That's one that I think we certainly put our viewpoint in because they haven't tipped their hand that they're in our favor or anything else. But But they're not all on the same moral equivalence of our need to be participating in it.
We were budgeting last year. We had no idea that was gonna come up.
Fair enough.
All right, moving forward, the next slide, number 6 here. Just a pie chart that shows the breakdown of the percentage of expenditures by department from the public safety, which is our largest department at 4 million. On down through debt service, administration, and the other departments. This includes the in-road construction, although I referenced there's not a road paving project per se, that we are including the 20,000 in there to do some sidewalk repairs to hit. We've got some areas that we really need to hit. We're doing some repairs there.
Chris, do you want to talk about what you put in for road repairs now, or do you want to wait till we get to that? Or are you just bringing this up because this one's coming from the general fund rather than budgeted elsewhere?
Right, yeah, I've got it in my notes further down, I think, when we talk, but we can, no, I mean, it could be.
I don't want to take you off track. Go
It could
ahead.
be a good segue, just to acknowledge that you're right, in the public works department, there's a right-of-way maintenance line item that we have included funds in there to do patching, with coal patch, rock and gravel, and marl for the edge of roads that we typically do. So I don't want there to be a perception there that there isn't any monies allocated to do road maintenance, even though we're not doing a road paving project, which is laying new asphalt on top. Typically is much larger project that in past funding expenses were, 300,000, 350,000.
Right.
So is that?
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. The next slide is another pie chart that just shows the percentage of breakdown of general fund expenditures by function, whether it's personnel, operating, debt service, contingency, or capital outlay. Again, well, not again, but just to note, personnel is our highest expense at 40%. And to note, the contingency fund is 705,000 that we're including. This slide shows the proposed general fund expenditures and personnel costs by department. The difference between the FY 24 budget and the proposed FY 25 budget, with an increase of 456,000, which equates to 7%. And I'd note these personnel costs include total wages and fringe benefits as total personnel, that we're not recommending or requesting any new FTEs in this budget. Some points of emphasis, if you look down the variance.
It's on there.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. If you look down the variance column here, just some points of emphasis when you look at the increase in public safety at 8%. So what we've included in this budget to recognize, we're calling it gap wages of approximately 142,000. And this is in public safety to account for the variability in their shift work. So ideally we have a shift, each shift has 6 PSOs for coverage, which we would consider fully staffed. And each PSO works anywhere from 171.5 hours to 212 hours in a month. The 212 hours is beyond that would be considered overtime, but that gap between the 175 or 171.5 and 212, it varies from one PSO to the other in terms of if we have PSO out and we need to fill for that shift, they could pick up that shift. So, and let me just acknowledge 171.5 hours, 171.5 hours is the equivalence of 7 24.5 hour shifts for the, basically. So in years past, we just sort of acknowledged that unknown and with an end of year budget amendment to pay for those costs. So this year, between Zach and our HR payroll, went through and tried to do an analysis of what, what's the average per year on that, and that's what we came up with. So we're true upping within the budget rather than at the end of the year, if that makes.
The budget amendment would draw out of the general fund in the past, okay?
Yeah.
And so, just to be clear, there's no year where there wouldn't be that expenditure. It's always been there, done it out of the general fund,
Right.
budget amendment, and you're just truing it up and.
Yeah, I mean, my direction from councils in the past, when it comes to public safety and staffing, is sort of a whatever it takes approach. That's to say, if, while Josh manages overtime and, juggles between PSOs to keep them under the 212, if it's the difference between having 5 on shift and having that 6 to be fully staffed, particularly in the season, we're gonna staff it. So. Looking at the admin line, you notice this decrease of 28%. What that's attributed to is we took the increases you see here in IT and HR is that we pulled their total personnel cost out of the admin's line and put it in their own respective department budgets with their operating cost and capital. And then beyond that.
So that just explains the wide variance, but there's not really a variance there. Yep. Got it.
That is a effort of Zach over the last year or two to get IT and HR out of under the administrative budget to be able to better track their departments' budgets and expenditures through the year.
Yeah, our goal with IT in the long run is to make them an internal service fund. So then that way, every department's, they'll have an allocation for IT and will base like their percentage of usage of how David's allocating his time to which department. So that way you're getting a more truer cost of what the actual department costs are.
Moving on. Shows the same cost in a pie chart with percentages and costs. And again, public safety. Public safety is our largest department. They have 6 PSOs per shift, 24 plus 3 in command staff and 1 admin assistant. And then followed by public works admin.
Could you run those numbers again? You have 24 PSOs, 3 command staff,
Yes.
and what was the last?
1 administrative assistant.
Okay.
And just to acknowledge, at least from where I sit in terms of PSO staffing on the shifts, I don't know if it's gonna work out that way, but when you think about the level, the percentage of development of the island at about 62%, if maybe perhaps a benchmark to add that 7th is when we get to 70%. I'm sort of throwing that out there, but then again, there may be some other variables that we got to take into consideration in terms of the seasonality and how that fluctuates. And if we see that fluctuate faster than getting to that 70% of development, that we would want to initiate that sooner rather than later.
So can you give us the history on when we went from 5 to 6?
We went from 5 to 6 in 2018.
And when did we go from 4 to 5?
I think we pretty much, at least my time here, and with the merger of fire and police, we were always at 5.
At 5?
5 was we could operate at 4 we could do 4, but really needed 5 because with regards to fire response in theory, and Josh can elaborate, but ideally you want to have for ISO rating, 2 trained firefighters that can attack internally with 2 that can back up and then 1 on the pump for 5. Is that fair to say?
So you're never supposed to go inside without at least 2, and then you're supposed to have 2 ready to rescue those.
Got it?
It's considered your RIT line.
And so, but having the historical data, we went from, 5 to 6 in 2018, whenever it was. What was the population of the island then? What were the peak numbers in the summertime? Having that to kind of build trend lines would help us determine when we need to go. Now, the other question to me is, how are we doing with PS volunteers and their ability to help and support the full-time staff? It seems to me that pool of people is dwindling. And are we gonna have to rely on professional staff more in going forward than what we have been? I'm throwing that out.
Are we down on public safety volunteers or?
When you look at the volunteers,
Yeah,
to be able to go inside the hot zone.
right.
They have to be certified. Now, we only have 2 certified volunteers in total. The rest of the volunteer staff, some do rehab, they have special allocations on what special job descriptions, of what they're able to do. But as far as actually helping us in the hot zone, we only have 2.
Got it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that we
Yeah.
had gone down that much.
And we used to have,
Because there's what, 20, there's
And that-
25 or so of.
that's public, safety on the auxiliary. We're not talking auxiliary,
No, I'm talking public,
We have 25.
yeah, we do.
public safety volunteer.
Yeah, I was gonna
You
say
have the
it's,
volunteers and then you have the auxiliary. So we're just talking about the volunteers.
Got it.
Volunteers, and Josh and I have had a lot of discussions about looking at the volunteers in the roster and recognizing that I think the need coming down the road to identify who's doing what, are they providing a value?
Mhm.
Right?
Right.
Because they're getting an incentive,
Matching skill sets with,
getting an
skills.
incentive.
mhm.
But do they have value? And then in terms of, so I would say in general, fire departments and even throughout Brunswick and the counties, that at one time were rural counties that really heavily relied on those volunteer fire departments to
Yeah.
respond, that there's been a shift and a transition sort of to some degree away from that. I mean, you still have some, but not nearly as many. All to say they're going to more full-time, professional paid
Mhm.
staffing.
Yeah.
And, there's other variables that we think about here on Bald Head that, like with other, things have changed, right? Years ago, you had a lot of folks that lived on island, believed in civic duty and volunteering and wanting to do that. They either said it was that or it was just a time for everybody to get together and socialize, right? I'm talking about the old
Yeah.
volunteers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But today we don't have as many of those folks. And the people that are coming to the island, for the most part, they're coming to get away and not necessarily volunteer in that way, maybe in other ways.
Mhm. Right.
Not to suggest they're not volunteering, but in
Yeah, yeah.
other ways.
Right.
And the other part is, to get trained to be a certified firefighter, to go internal for a volunteer is, there's a lot of work to behind that. And finding people that are willing and wanting to do that is a challenge too.
And
That's the-
where a lot of it, that last part is where a lot of it's coming into play is. When I got into the fire service, you could go inside a burning house with what they call 1403, which was only a certain little few classes. But now you can't even do that. You have to have the whole certification
Yeah.
before you can. It's very strenuous.
It was just, my point, I'm just trying to bring up the issue that it's harder and harder to find volunteers that are willing to go that extra mile to serve in that particular role that we need. And if we can't find them, then what do we do? Do we need
I wonder if we
higher?
don't renew the call for it though, because we have had a lot of folks turn over and just like you and I were
Yeah.
talking here, right? The fact that we only have two that are certified out of that cadre of 25. There might be some other people on island now that don't know. or-
I thought the Lighthouse Landing fire would have brought them out.
So.
And we got a lot of volunteers out of that. Yeah.
Like even when we send our PSOs that may get hired without fire certification. It's about a 6 to 7 month Monday through Friday
Wow, yeah,
certification.
Yeah.
So how many people are gonna be willing to give up Monday through Friday, a full-time job?
Sure.
in essence, for 6 months to get certified?
Yeah, and Josh, Scott was making a comment about correlating the number of fighters with population. And the reality is you have to have 5 people to fight a fire
At minimum.
at a minimum. Okay, so,
whether there's one person here or 1,000.
That's right.
Yeah,
Right, yeah.
okay,
And that's bare minimum. That's
Right.
one person running the fire truck with the 2 in and 2 out.
The other thing that Josh is gonna is challenged with is a balance and an understanding that we don't necessarily need 40 volunteers.
Right. Right.
You know, at some point you get to that threshold where too many is not what you need.
counterproductive.
right.
So really looking at what we have, the value of those. Then, and having a threshold, and then within that, are there folks that are willing to go through the training to get certified to beef up our fire response as internal firefighters? These are all the things that Josh and I have already been talking about, but
Good. Thanks.
And it's not just here. The state actually putting out grants right now for trying to proactively get volunteers in all of the volunteer stations, because they're everywhere, the volunteer firefighters are starting to dwindle and disappear.
Mhm. It's a different world today.
all right, so the next slide here of the personnel cost by expense type. And just to acknowledge what I had mentioned, when you look at full-time salaries and the chart, the table here on the right, where we included those public safety gap hours. And then, but between full-time salaries on through, with the overall totals here at 456,000 or 7%.
Yeah, that 140,000, we were covering out of general fund balance in the past. And now we're trying to incorporate it. So although it shows up as in total an 8.5% increase, it's really not.
Right, and then just to acknowledge, we've parceled out this utility overhead, which is a negative where we're paying JP, Mark, Michelle, those folks, because their roles, responsibilities also include things within the utilities of the enterprise fund.
Mike and Chris do their stuff.
Mike and Chris, yeah, 5, there's 5. The 2 mechanics as well,
Mhm.
doing. So we're showing that. Next slide here is just to show those general fund expenditures with the capital outlay for FY 25 with the respective costs by department. And the total capital expense is looking at 365,000, which is an increase over last year's capital, which was about 239,000. I would summarize a good portion of the capital items. Oh, excuse me. Good portion of the capital items in public safety at 120,000. Followed with IT for a variety of things. IT contracted services. The contractor services to acknowledge the gravel fencing to try to get it. I mean, it'll always require maintenance to maintain the drivable areas, but to get it graded, the fencing in particular with our plans for sort of gated control. And then, and to acknowledge, we'll be moving, and I'll acknowledge it probably later in the stormwater fund, but we're gonna pull 80,000 from the stormwater fund to install the stormwater basins that are required by our state stormwater permit. We haven't done yet. The road construction again for sidewalk repairs, 20,000.
Do we know what sidewalks we're gonna repair with those or already, or is that sort of yet to be determined?
A little of both.
Okay,
We definitely have some locations that we're aware of where sidewalks are, you know, pretty significant. Mainly in the Cape Fear Station. area.
okay.
So I've asked JP to sort of tackle those, prioritize and tackle accordingly.
But none of this is meant for the road patching. This is in the separate line item within the, okay.
Yes.
Couple quick questions. Josh, the defibrillators, are those all to be kept on our trucks and vehicles, or are any of these to be located, strategically located around the island? Like,
The ones here are the actual bigger ones that go in the ambulance. There's
Okay.
one for each ambulance.
Okay.
It doesn't, it's not just a AED, it's gives them the rhythm so they can see it, prints them out, so they can give it over to Rosa County EMS, the strip of the rhythm and everything. And those are, our current ones cannot be serviced any longer. They're too old to be serviced. Our service contractor said that if something breaks, that's it, they're out of service.
I'm just wondering if we ought not, do we know which organizations have AEDs?
Village-owned buildings have AEDs in.
Got it?
Then that's the only ones that we've been responsible for.
Right.
So I don't know what other ones on the island have them, but I know that village-owned buildings do have AEDs.
I don't know if the club has them, do you?
I was just thinking that.
I'm pretty sure they do, because I know
I've.
I've seen boxes.
But I'll check with
Yeah.
David and get back to you on that. I think I'll also try to holler and see what
Yeah.
comes up the market.
Yeah.
No, you're close by.
And then on back to sidewalk repair, I know in some cities, towns, there's kind of a machine that kind of. If you got this kind of action going on, it just kind of grinds that down and smooths it out. Instead of, to allow the root structure to continue to do what it's gonna do. Until such time that they just need to prepare the whole thing. So I don't know what. If we have one of those devices or care to have one, or just,
We don't have one, we could always rent one.
okay,
And Gone that route, yeah.
okay. Thank you.
And to acknowledge within that congressional earmark request for the 6.7 million that we can tie some solid sidewalk repairs in with the paving, at the time we do the paving. In theory.
Yeah, but that money is, if it came through at all, wouldn't be until December, something like that.
Yeah, probably March of 2020.
Okay.
Wanted to highlight the golf cart registration software at 35,000. So that's something that had included in the current budget, as we had discussed last year, and sort of moving to automating that, and recognizing the total numbers of golf carts that we're registering. And Scott, forgive me, I misquoted. I thought it was about 2,000. It's like 3,300, currently 3,300. And so, you know, right now, you know, we've got a staff member, the public safety administrative assistant, whose primary responsibility a lot of times is just managing golf cart registrations. And so yeah, I don't know I don't recall to the extent I got into it last year's budget workshop on this item, other than to acknowledge it. But more to respond to Scott when we met and talking about sort of some justification on that. You know, I've talked with between David Cox, IT, Josh, Jay, and we actually, you know, had demoed a software for priority. You know, LaGrange Park in Chicago that does this I wanted to share that with y'all so you could see what it would look like. But that in theory would be where one-stop shop for folks to go and register their golf carts and get their stickers in the mail and put them on their golf carts. And so, but in terms of convenience for us, for the customer to have that option, time and cost savings, increased efficiencies, Josh has some details on, in terms of actuarial or true time spent. Josh, you want to talk a little bit about the admin assistant and managing that?
Okay, so Elizabeth, our admin assistant, she's tasked currently with golf cart registrations as an additional responsibility on top of all of our other responsibilities. And as of late, it has ended up taking up most of her time. From beginning of this fiscal year, July 1st to present, there has been 287 golf carts that had to be physically inspected. Those are new to the island golf carts. So about 29 golf carts per month. Takes her anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes to go out there and go through the checklist list, identify any issues. That's not including putting them into the system. And in December, this is due December 31st, it goes out December 31st. So the month of December, she spends an average of 10 to 12 hours of overtime a week just doing golf carts. And that takes her away from doing our POs as we need them done. And especially this year, as during the council retreat, I went over the NCLEA for the law enforcement. That's gonna have a lot of administrative assistance, getting all that together for us for that accreditation. So she only has so much time in the day. But not just golf carts, but you add those in plus all the ICE registrations she has to do for all the internal combustion engines. It's a lot.
Would this software help with the ICE registrations then at all?
Yes. ICE.
Scott was asking if the golf cart registration portal would also work to register annual ICE permits.
Yes, it could also be used, it could be modified for that also.
How would it help us with the new vehicles? I'm kind of confused on, I get the renewal process, but like you
Yeah.
mentioned the 300 new vehicles, somebody's still got to lay eyes on them, right? So
Let me address that one. You're right, Scott, and that's something we got to address in the current ordinance in
Yeah.
terms of,
yeah, because we got one of those requests in front of us right now, right?
Right.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, in my mind, what my vision here is, and everybody may fault this, but I'm trying to get folks to be responsible to register their vehicle on time. No different than how I register my vehicle through NCDOT.
Yeah.
And also acknowledging that my vehicle is safe and that it meets the requirements to be on the road. Plain and simple. That's what I'm trying to get to. And, but acknowledging, am I going too far with that?
No.
Oh,
Not at all.
Because half built out.
Mhm.
And we're potentially gonna add however many more, couple thousand golf carts. And we talked about this transition to move to that. The manual, the paperwork, all those things to get away from that.
Yeah.
In addition to, Josh would highlight the use of it from a public safety when they're out in their patrol vehicles and they come, anytime they approach somebody in the vehicle, the first thing they're gonna look at is the registration number. If, how many vehicles that come up missing, first thing I do is look at the vehicle registration number. There's so many things they need from that information and to have it in real time in their vehicles. and their MDAs, their mobile data tablets, MDTs. So, yeah, that's just another. But to your point, Scott, there will need to be some revisions to the chapter 28 ordinance specific to first-time inspections for new vehicles.
Yeah, I mean,
Anyway,
I think your instincts are right. It's just
Yeah.
trials can verify, right? But somebody's still got to verify, and an online system won't help us with new vehicles.
so the online system, if we're registering 300 new vehicles and she's already overworked with the number of vehicles right now, add 300 more, it's an appropriate.
But it's not just new registrations either, even on your renewals. She has to verify that it's been paid for, print out the sheet, attach the 2 stickers to it. They come by and pick them up. That's another 5-minute interaction during the day for each person coming in to pick up golf carts.
Yeah, but all I'm saying is that then the number of vehicles that we're gonna have on this island is increasing. If she's already overworked, having software to,
Mhm.
it just makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, Scott, to your point, through the first time or through the registration portal, yeah, it would be set up where the requirements you have to meet are on that registration portal. And you have to click the box, right, to acknowledge you've read it and you understand it and you know it.
Mhm.
That's sort of what I envision.
Sure.
And if for whatever reason, someone brings a golf cart to the island on the barge, because that's our only pinch point that we don't control is the barge. And that's how people get things sometimes over here is because if you go to the barge landing, you paid the barge fee to bring something over here, they're going to bring it over. That's sort of the reality of what we deal with from an operational standpoint. And so there are going to be times that happens, and it has happened. And, Josh has had to reach out to that individual to say, look, that vehicle doesn't meet our standards and you have to unfortunately remove it from the island. And I'd say 99% of the time they comply. Okay. Other questions on those items? This next slide is looking at our current outstanding debt service. With the 4 current loans and their remaining balances. After FY25 loan payments are made for each note. And the bottom table shows it extended out through the year 2036. And so our outstanding our FY25 principal payments, 3.29 million. Important to note, the 2018 GEO bond, our last payment,
On the next one.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna go to the slide. The last payment is in October of 2025. Our public safety building, our last payment is in December.
We do that, Chris, the 2018 GEO bond, that's essentially going to be replaced with our new one,
2025.
with the beach renourishment.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So we can expect that amounts in future years to continue once we apply that debt. But there may be that transition period we discussed where we're paying interest only between the two.
It'll be level.
Say again, Zach?
It'll be level.
Right. Moving to general fund revenues. This pie chart just highlights the types of revenue sources the village receives. The majority of them through the ad valorem property tax at 72%. This shows sort of the other categories off here to the right that are labeled down here.
So where would the accommodation tax revenues fall? In the other category?
The BRAT fund. So the accommodation tax, if, let's see. So on the smaller broken out pie chart,
Yeah.
falls in that 8% other, that gray shaded area. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Sorry, I was pointing like I had the light on my finger.
Slide 15 here in your books identifies the classes of revenue. What was budgeted for in the current FY 24 budget, revenues year to date, our estimates for collections throughout the remainder of the fiscal year, and what is being projected for the upcoming FY 25 and the change from FY 24. And just some points to emphasize on this slide. We're going to see an increase in our ad valorem property revenues of 1.5 million here over FY 24. Our other revenue sources of 1.34 million here to include the accommodations taxes, which fund the Shoreline Protection Department and our debt service on the 2018 GEO bond, with the remaining funds being applied to the BRAT fund. We're continuing to see a projected increase in interest earnings on investments at 224,000. Power bill funds that we receive from the state, which is also considered, that's within those other funds,
It's unrestricted.
are restricted, thanks Zach, of 49,000. Power bill funds are to supplement road maintenance that we get from
Got
the
it.
state. And then Brunswick County, we've requested again from Brunswick County for EMS funding, 325,000. Which is an increase over the current amount of 298,000.
And that's all contained in that restricted line?
Yes. Our revenues, to point out our revenues for contractor services of 640,000 includes storage units and Connex box rentals of 139,000 and 43,000 respectively. ICE and golf cart parking, 120,000 and 20,000 respectively, and then the sale of diesel and gas, 77,000 and 210,000. All of which fund personnel operating and debt service expenses for the year. I've got a separate slide, give a little more detail on that. Also to acknowledge down at the bottom, the IPC revenues, 490,000 that fund or revenues that are generated through our package delivery, processing of FedEx packages and UPS packages. We're estimating that we will process about 83,000 packages this year. And we've applied a 1.5% growth on that. And we, as I'll re-reference, we got our per package rate increases, both UPS and FedEx, to $8 per package.
Just refresh my memory. I could have sworn at the last, maybe it was the last meeting, or maybe it was just in your office, that we're actually losing money with packages. Okay, so this increase is reflective of the, monies we have coming in. But in reality,
We're still deficit, and I'll got that on a specific slide for IPC to talk through.
But that's only more recently added an employee, right? And added the Saturday service. That's the delta is effectively why we're running at a deficit now. Before it was pretty much negligible, which again, if, we need the, I think the Saturday's merited, right?
Yeah.
People need it on Saturday, but like, that's what's driving that year over year, or what it looks like is driving it year over year. Chris, can I ask a question? So when we're looking here at the requested budget line, or the requested budget column, right? The ad valorem tax, that's assuming an increase in the tax rate. Correct? To get to that number. The rest of these are assuming nothing changes, correct? Or am I misreading that somehow?
I mean, there is some, but yeah, go ahead, Zach.
So we base each individual revenue type, just assuming in the budget, there's so many variables at play.
Yep.
So for example, the interest, that 224,000, that's a pretty conservative estimate, right? We take into account, potential changes in the market rate.
Yep.
Just the earnings back, there's many things that could change it. The IPC, like Chris said, we base that on package counts.
Right.
And so we actually use a flat line for that one. So that one is based on current package counts. Just we'll see an increase there because of the increased prices for the packages.
Yep.
So each revenue type is independent of one another, right? So I think.
Yeah, I get that, but on all of them, you're just looking back at what it was prior year with a confidence interval. When we're talking about ad valorem, you're actually baking in the, whatever that is, a 10-12% increase to the tax rate to get to that number. Right? It's not just looking at what the prior year's rate was and multiplying it out. That's got the increase in there.
Yeah, so we have to base that ad valorem amount on what the other revenues don't cover.
Yep.
Right, if they're assigned somewhere, they're restricted, and then that's the number you have to go with and base your tax rate off of to balance your budget out.
Got it.
To include the capital.
Yep.
as well.
Yep.
All right. Revenues include within building inspection estimates approximately 32 residential and 2 commercial permits for a total revenue projection of 181,000. ICE vehicles, daily permit fees and annual permit fees. Fund balance appropriation of 50,000, which is a carryover for the UDO, Unified Development Ordinance, to supplement the 100,000 for a total of 150,000 that we discussed last Friday. And then we have some other smaller revenue generators, including the Marina Park, where we rent out for special events, and a canoe and kayak storage at our public creek access facility. But total revenues projected to meet expenditures of 17.2 million. All right, so I'm going to move to the next slide that addresses the ad valorem tax and the rate. So this slide shows the breakdown of the ad valorem tax rates to include the base rate and then the MSD zone rates for MSD zone A and B respectively. And then what the total rate is and the total value of revenue for as calculated.
And what's the current rate?
So the current rate is 0.5779. And then with a tax rate increase to meet expenditures, as you've seen up to this point, would look at a 0.069 tax rate increase to get you to that 0.6469 base.
I'm sorry, the increase is 0.069.
Yes.
So run through those numbers one more time, Chris.
So to fund the expenses that we've seen up to this point would require a 0.069 increase.
To get us to 0.06469 island-wide, 0.7137 MSDA, and 0.6, okay.
That's a 12% increase.
Yeah.
Again, I'd request, just for the ease of people following along, that we add what the current rate is and what the proposed increase is, so they don't have to
Yeah.
do it through deduction there like we're doing right now.
Yeah.
We could.
I think And I'll talk with Zach as we put together the, as we put together the presentation slides for the
There we go.
public hearing. That we'll try to be cognizant of that to, understanding that,
Yeah, let's just not hide it from them, right?
Yeah.
It is what it is.
And that's kind of what we tried to do with this slide, is be as transparent as possible. So what does that 0.6469 new rate mean in terms of the annual difference from what people would be currently be paying now versus to what they would be paying with that proposed rate?
Yep.
You can see on a $1 million home, the math's easy. If it's a 6.9 cent tax rate increase on $1 million home, it equates to $690 a year annually. So
this is a slide we typically include that breaks it down dollar, but the rate, the value of the tax dollar on the base rate with public safety, 25 cents on down.
And just a point of clarity here, so, and these percentages are not going to match up to the overall budget percentages because we have those restricted funds and those things those revenues that are classified for certain activities. And so those are not included here. This is strictly the value of how it's broken down.
Next, wanted to share a recommendation that those revenues that we referenced include an increase in our ICE annual and daily permit fees that we've calculated based on the CPI. So you can see in the table, the top table is your daily ICE fees, and they're all based on a vehicle class, which is based on the length of the vehicle, as you can see. What the current FY 24 rate is, CPI, sorry, calculated CPI on the FY 24. The actual CPI, and then the current daily fees, and then the proposed daily fees. So you can see how they increase there.
Yeah, so the calculated CPI FY 24 column is what the fees would be if we based it strictly on that CPI from the prior calculated CPI rate. The actual is what the current fees would actually be with the CPI. Current daily fees for what they are paying right now. Column based on those calculations.
Thank you, Zach.
You're welcome.
And then the bottom table is on the annual ICE fees. Proposed annual fees at the wrong compared to the current annual fees.
It just looks like a pretty big jump. Maybe, are they all 30 in the 30 to 35% range jumps?
That happens at.
Yeah, I do. Here, one sec. There's 75 to 100, 150 to 275, 400, 360.
So the annuals, you have a 14.5% increase. In the class 1, class 2 to 5 are in the 6.5% to 10% range.
But the dailies,
The dailies are, looks like 6% to 7%. So the first class for the dailies, $10 a day increase.
Right.
Second is 25, the third's 50, the fourth is 125, and the fifth is 140.
I got that, but to me, 140 over 360 is almost a 40% increase.
I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Yes, you're right, Scott. I was looking at the wrong table. My apologies. Looks like it's a 33 to 40% increase on those. My apologies.
Yeah.
Wrong table. Too many tables.
That's okay. No. Just kind of seems like a big jump. But I don't know how others feel about that.
What was the last time we increased those fees? Is this playing catch up?
It was last year and we did that based on the ordinance. the ICE vehicle ordinance, right?
Yeah, in 2018, when we did the chapter 28 rewrite, it included the transition table and moving from IC to electric for contractors. And it also included because up to that point, there had never been any increases in ICE permit fees. So it also included guidance on that for annual increases. And yeah, it's
So when you say that's calculated under daily ice fees, calculated CPI fiscal year 24, those numbers, explain to me the 523.
523 for category 5 for
Yeah.
daily.
I mean, if we're currently charging $360 and you're indexing to a consumer price index, I'm struggling with how we got 35% or 38% jump.
So it's that calculated CPI, that would be based on an increase from the calculated CPI from last year, which was like $33. So that shifts it to more based on the current, I guess, the CPI of 3.2%. The actual increase. Sorry, let me get my numbers here. Based on that calculated CPI would be that $36. So we're basing the calculated CPI on prior years, calculations from prior years.
Mm-hmm.
And then what that actual CPI would be based on those numbers is that actual column. And then you can see there's a $6 difference between what the actual CPI would be since they started tracking it over time
Mm-hmm.
and what the current daily fee is. And as such, we propose going up on that. And I also think keeping it at an even number, 40, 100, 200, it's easier to track on limited side as far as when they're charging people and basing how those numbers come in.
Well, yeah, back to revisit that.
I don't know. That just seemed like a big jump to me. And
You want us to go back and
I don't know how the others, I kind of throwing it out here to see what the others think about that. But those look like some pretty big jumps on the class 4 and class 5 numbers.
class 4 and 5 on both the daily?
Now, I don't have a problem with the annuals.
Annual.
Those look reasonable, but particularly class 4 and class 5 look like much bigger jumps. I
I
mean,
mean, I'd ask just from a rate making standpoint, are we trying to discourage lower vehicles and daily use? Is there a strategy to our rate making here? Or are we just saying whatever?
I mean, it's a good question, and I would say, going back to 2018 and the committee at the time and the mindset of what they did, how they did it and what they put in there was with that purpose in mind.
Yeah.
To try to get folks to shift from ICE to electric.
Mhm.
Even goes back to that schedule of doing that too, that's something that I'll need to come forward at some point. Yes, technically by that schedule, by the year 2025, all ICE vehicles should have transitioned to electric. There's just.
That ain't happening.
And when they did, I think I'm on record, when they worked on that as saying that's not practical or realistic. I don't know how we can do that.
Can you make it, I don't know whether you can, but make a distinction between who are the dailies versus the yearly annual? And so when you're looking at, you're clocking somebody, this jump in fee, but they're doing it once a year. They're doing it 3 times a year. And if you're telling me, well, 3 times a year, it's another $100 off their annual budget. It's, it doesn't mean that much, but if somebody's coming over here and they're paying an annual, daily, twice a week. You know,
Like Bill.
just give me an idea of who we're talking about.
They'll be,
The annual?
they'll pay the.
You have any idea?
Yeah, the annuals are for folks, contractors that
They're keeping their vehicles here.
keeping their vehicles on island.
I got that.
The dailies are everybody else.
So,
So
when
when-
we're built, so to Jenny's question, builder's first source. Can't they buy an annual fee?
Well, builders for first source is, we have what's called a fleet pass,
Okay.
Oh,
where they do pay an annual, right, Josh?
Yes, they pay an annual, but they are permitted by that company name to have the pass, because you never know what delivery truck's gonna
Right.
Got it.
be loaded, so they can pass.
pass it from one truck to the next. Good.
So when we're getting food deliveries to the club, to the grocery store, et cetera,
Those are annual fleet passes.
those are annual fee passes.
Booze and Cisco, they all have,
You want to give an example of some dailies?
dailies, you'll have companies come over to, like if you had just a project going on in your house, they were redoing your fireplace. They're not here all the time, right? That's just something they're coming over to do. They would purchase the daily.
Interior designer?
Yep.
Mhm.
Now they could be here, it could be a big project where it lasts a week, so they would pay for 5 days. But then they're.
Again, on this pricing, if you're ever gonna be here more than 5 days, just get an annual pass, correct? 5 or 6 days.
Well,
So with your annual, you have to, with the exception of the fleet, for the large commercial entities that use that, your annual, you have to provide documentation of where you will be keeping that and paying to keep that on the aisle.
Okay,
you have to apply
i.e.
for it.
yeah, I got it.
Services.
So when you're coming over on a daily and you say, okay, they're coming over to fix the fireplace, it's gonna take 4 days. Where's that truck? While it's here.
So they have to arrange for contractor services as well, but they get a cheaper rate because they're paying by the day. Because contractor services has an annual versus a daily as well.
Right.
So for the fleet passes, are we proposing some kind of increase for them that's
They
commensurate or analogous with this?
They pay the annual,
Okay,
they pay the annual for a truck,
so it's not a separate rate. I got it. Okay.
but they get. Cause they know, like Josh said, they never know which cab of the truck they're pulling the trailer with.
Yep.
So, but they can only have one truck trailer on the island at any given time
With that pass.
with that pass.
So back to Scott's point about, what's our rate making strategy here? Ultimately, truck comes over to service a home for a day or 2 or 3. The property owner's paying it. Right? And so, and I guess I'm fine with that, if we want to jack the rates high. But I don't know, I'm struggling. Do we jack the property tax rate to cover that little bit of revenue? Or do we jack daily ice fees by 35% to?
If I had to categorize anecdotally, I'd want to go back and look at the actual numbers, but your vehicle class typically for dailies are 1s and 2s, maybe 3s. By the time you get for a daily for a 4 and 5, I don't know.
There aren't that many of them.
Right.
All right, I've said my piece.
But
Anybody else wants to weigh in? Fine. If not, let's move on.
you want us to revisit that?
If I'm the only one, no.
Yeah, I think if, in terms of a strategy, why would you do this? There's a part of me that says, when I look at a fleet pass and somebody's coming over, Builders First Source is making 4 deliveries when they come over. If I'm looking at a fireplace repair, it's like, yeah, schedule 4 different schedule your work so that you're not making 4 trips, right? I mean, I think of putting it on them to solve their problem as opposed to us trying to reduce.
Well, that makes sense to anybody else. So I just, I don't have a problem with this at all.
Okay. Move on.
All right, next slide. 20 here, proposed general fund budget for the IPC and post office. So this slide shows the breakdown of the revenues and expenses with the budget of $617,300 on the expenditures. The bulk of the revenue projected at 490. Revenues, 490, 1,100 are from the processing of inbound UPS packages at 261,000 here. And then FedEx, 147,000 here. And as we had mentioned, the deficit in revenues to meet the projected expenses of approximately 127,000 down at the bottom that would be covered by the general fund. And just talking with Zach and I talking about the deficit of 127. Good portion of that is that fifth FTE, but there's, it's not just the FTE. There's a few other things there, but there's variability in package counts and even throughout the year and the season. And one of the things we're talking about is trying to take one or two of those FTEs in there and during downtimes, train them to do other things. IT in nature that may prove as part of a succession plan to move up within the village organization in other ways. It's, the value is based on the need or the wants, desires of the folks that wanted the Saturday delivery. We talked about part-time and the challenges of trying to find someone that would just want to come in and work on a Saturday. That additional FTEs available and folded in with the others to allow them for time off, vacation, someone's sick, we're not stressing, lines aren't backing up.
I think it's really just, it comes down to a decision. I'm simplifying a decision. We're saying, we're gonna take the general fund, we're gonna hit it for $127,000 a year. So people can get their packages. So theoretically.
On Saturdays.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, you should be paying cumulatively $127,000 more to get your packages here.
Yeah.
And as, am I doing that wrong? Okay.
The other thing I wanted to point out is our US Post Office contract at 39,000. So that's an annual payment we get from USPS to run what they call a contract postal unit. Basically, that's the mail, first through third class mail delivery and USPS package delivery. And Zach and Jay are working with discussions with USPS for an increase in that amount. Ideally, I'd love to have that figure equal at least one FTE with benefits to handle the fringe benefits versus a base salary. That doesn't even do that.
It's a conversation that's been going on a long time though, right?
It's, a long time as in months or over a year or more. Yes.
Okay.
It's a balance to some degree with dealing with USPS and acknowledging the state of that organization fiscally, right? And I don't necessarily know we want to put ourselves in a position that they might say, well, you all want too much. You guys can just go over to Southport and get your mail. that, so. Anyway. All right. Moving on to the contractor services. Which this slide breaks down revenues and expenses with a balanced budget of $640,800. The bulk of the revenues from the sale of gas. Sale of gas at $209,000 and the sale of diesel at $76,000. You can see the rents on parking for IC vehicle, golf carts, storage bins, which are the Connex boxes, and then the storage unit rents in the building.
Chris, what's the significance of the highlighting in the blue?
I was gonna ask the same question.
The next slide.
No.
Okay.
We are proposing increases. Yeah, which is why I highlighted those to showcase them on the next one.
So looking at the proposed service fees. And the changes, the current change, fee of, for example, $30 ICE daily. Going to 40. Your monthly parking of 90 going to 120. Annual parking for ICE going to 1,200. Then golf cart parking monthly and annually. And storage container rental monthly. And storage container rental annually. And storage unit rental monthly. These are probably a little more modest, what do you say?
Oh, I think, yeah. On current prices, yeah.
Yeah.
Are the contractor services spots all fully subscribed or we have vacancy?
Um,
Would the right answer to that be it depends?
Depends on the size. What we're doing is we're trying to make new spaces as we go forward. Sometimes we're able to, depending on the size of the vehicle, sometimes we're not.
Well,
and
today, is it full or not?
So I know golf cart parking, we have like,
We are currently full.
we have a dedicated number of annual, monthly and daily spaces.
Okay.
So essentially, if they don't fall into the monthly or annual, those are what are available to rent out daily, right? So based on what Pete said, those are full.
Yes.
Same with storage containers?
Yes.
What are we gonna do about that? Not allow any more golf carts? Not allow any more storage?
well, in terms of storage, we have. A whole nother section of storage units that we would construct.
Okay.
That would extend from the current 16
Right.
down to the end of the property. And that all, is based on timing of when we pay the current debt off and demand. So I don't know if any demand for storage units specifically at this point. Is there, JP?
I have to check with Mike to see if we can request. I don't have that with me today.
ICE parking, again, fluctuates. So really, it's the golf cart parking is probably the one that I see
Biggest challenge.
is maybe would be the biggest challenge, and I would just need to work with JP to evaluate the contract of service or to see are there other areas within that we can take advantage of for additional parking. Because we still have to put in the parking with the, well, JP left.
It ran. Failed.
I believe we still have, golf cart parking with electrical to put in. We haven't yet finished that part of it.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
I think you're right.
Yeah, Josh, how is that enforced?
What's that?
Well, parking is, so do they have special stickers to park their golf carts in there?
Or is it, you,
No, we don't have any stickers per se. That's all, it's all.
We have an attendant that tracks it.
we have what?
An attendant, you have your
Oh, we do.
contractor services employee that tracks that. You know,
As far
But
as
the
those,
end of the day, there's an extra 20 golf carts parked back in there. Who would know?
Joe,
Yeah, our attendant,
it might,
I have an answer to your question. We currently are maxed out for both, cart parking and regular vehicle parking, depending on the size, the larger vehicles. And we do have a couple on a waiting list for a, storage unit round.
So the demand's there.
and then there was a comparison of pricing like at the marina, right? The golf cart parking there, $2,500 a year.
Oh, say that again, Zach?
So the parking for golf carts, you know, up near the marina, you know, we had it quoted out and it's almost $2,500. Is
For an annual golf cart rental
Parking in the
in that
marina.
parking space.
that right, David? David, is that right?
Yes, that's
Wow.
And that's fully subscribed, I would assume.
yes.
Filled
The field,
completely? Golf cart parking at the marina?
we don't have anything to do with that.
No, it's full, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, JP, do we have any, when you're saying parking is at capacity right now, is that working within the footprint, rearranging? Are we gonna get more parking just by rearranging, or
We've done that already.
we've done that already? Okay,
Now what we're trying to do is put a graphic overlay together to identify everything, but we have the spots all laid out. We don't have the overlay completed yet.
okay, but the overlay, even doing the overlay, you're thinking that we're not gonna be gaining a bunch of parking spots?
Correct.
and Mayor, just to put that a little bit in perspective, minus your fleet that we were talking about earlier, we're currently at 377 annual ice permits. Position, 377 vehicles.
I like to, when we have to reorganize when the, down traffic, so we got to incorporate and move those containers off the property and move some of the parking off of there. So that was also absorbed into the new parking scheme.
sorry, which parking spot?
The Panama track, which was across the street from Contractor Services,
Oh,
which was
yeah.
sold by Limited.
Yep.
Okay.
We got used to that for a number of years, I guess, prior to
In
this year.
terms of the size of our contractor lot right now, are we at capacity, or do we have land that we just haven't developed?
We have land that we haven't developed with the footprint of the second set of storage units.
The Connex boxes are there now to a certain extent.
Yeah,
Okay, but where those Connex boxes are, is there parking there right now
In front of them,
in front of it? Okay,
in front of each box, there's a parking spot.
got it.
within the rent of the box, you get one parking.
Yeah, I got it.
spot.
So if I understand you correctly,
We're done.
we're going to extend the built storage facilities. We're going to actually remove the Connex boxes that are sitting there right now. Where are those Connex boxes going to go? So, on off island.
Yeah, eventually they would be,
So we're maxed out.
well, I really want to see that overlay first because I feel like on the back property line
Up against the forest.
up against the forest, that there may be potential there, but
Okay.
I really want to see the overlay with JP on that first.
I don't know how the others feel about that, but I see a problem coming down the road. If we don't have some sort of, the beginning of a plan to add some additional capacity. Unless I'm missing something.
Well, the only thing that if your rate of construction on the island doesn't
Slows down.
change or slows down, you know,
We should be okay.
theoretically, we're
Okay.
okay. I mean, that stands to reason, right? So I mean, I don't want to be building a bunch of stuff back there that, now that the island is built out, knowing I got a whole bunch of contractor service area.
And I agree with that. I think what I would want to do is factor in, as we do have some additional growth, there's probably going to be a couple extra 2 or 3 or 4 service providers. HVAC, electrical, plumbing, blah, blah, blah. And there's going to continue to be renovation and reworking done instead of new builds. So, I don't know how you develop numbers.
The other thing that to consider that may help to some degree is vendors that are purchasing and building commercial property where they, because if it's zoned commercial,
Got it.
they can park IC vehicles and their golf carts on their
Provide storage and move out the contract. Got it.
like Phillips.
We don't have many of those.
Well, you have some that just never did move in. You have Phillips and you have, Trinity. There's a couple of them that have their own and, Jeff's place over here, Whitney Blair, that have their own places, their own storage, their own offices.
Okay.
And so if you assume, I don't know why you would assume it, but you have somebody like Henson or, some of these other contractors who depend on this contractor services yard, maybe they won't in the
Okay.
long run.
All right.
So in summary on the general fund, excuse me. The general fund budget recommended includes a tax rate increase of 0.069. Fund the proposed expenditures for personnel operations, debt service and capital outlay and the contingency. The 2 MSD zones A and B, while are also included to generate revenues to pay shoreline debt with the 2018 GO bond on the private beach nourishment project and the going to replacement, there is no recommended increase to those current rates. I referenced the fund balance appropriation again of 50,000. Supplement the 100,000 for funding of the UDO development effort. So at this time, I want to have Zach go through the next few slides on the financial model and modeling by use of the model, assumptions and estimated outcomes. And this goes to the question of some point how we can start to look at replenishment of the fund balance.
Yep.
So before I change the slide, I want to preface this with there are variables at play when it comes to modeling for future years. And this is not definitive, but this is best guess estimate. I'd like to compare financial modeling to the hurricane tracking modeling, where there's these lines. So there, any change that line any direction, right? So also I want to thank Cindy, her patience with Chris and I, because we were changing numbers and moving things around and recalculating. And every time we did that, we had to go back into the model and update those. So thanks for being patient with me. All right. So to discuss the assumptions that we have with working with the model, it includes the proposed budget as is and the tax rate at 0.6469 island-wide. For future years, we assume a universal growth factor of 0.75%. And that's based on property values and gives us the various values of a penny on the tax rate per year. And we have capital and operating increases at that assumed growth rate factor. And personnel, we have those increasing at our current rates, which is different from the universal growth factor. A big caveat here is that the assumption is that legal fees are to decrease by half in the following fiscal year, and with the legal fees to decrease to zero in the fiscal year after that. So big caveat there.
You're just talking related to the transportation though. I mean, it's.
Yeah, we're not, yeah.
General counsel, we'd still have.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yes.
Beach development and all that stuff.
So I would consider those additional legal fees, right?
Got it.
In addition to regularly budgeted fees. So. Debt service, this does take into account current debt service that we have now, and the 13.5 million GO bond that was, set to go before the LGC in a couple weeks. There's also an assumption here that even though we are going up, would go up to 0.6469, each subsequent fiscal year would drop down for the next 4 years, would drop that rate by 2 cents each year. Also, the MSD zones would decrease equal to the universal growth rate. The reason there is that as you're growing, that's really a flat number. So you have to take into account, you're growing by this much, what should that MSD zone be to offset and get you a revenue neutral on those rates? And also, as I said earlier, the property values are to increase at the universal growth rate. So these two bottom screenshots are, I just wanted to show you all what we're looking at when we're talking about inputs in the model and estimates. You can see all of the little, I guess that's a peach colored box. Those are input cells and they have formulas that help calculate. These red outline cells show us when we hit under our targeted fund balance, percentages, amounts, and I'll show you all that, what it looks like on a chart shortly. This one on top though is for debt service. I know it looks familiar. It is not the same graph, even though it's the same colors that we saw during the GO bond discussions. So I don't want somebody to look at this and say, well, you said it was going to be a flat debt service. Over time, we have a public safety loan that comes off in 27, which is that sharp decrease. And then there's some that fall off in 28 also. So, any question on the assumptions?
Yeah, the universal growth factor. Tell me how you come up with that.
It's a very long calculation. So we take prior property values, like when we did the revenue neutral calculation, and just base that on an extended period just to get that 0.75%. It's an estimated guess.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a scenario and tell me if it affects it at all. So in 2.5 years, we figure out how to stop or extremely slow down development on the island. And your new construction drops a bunch. Does that affect that at all?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So that 0.75, when you're talking about property values, I think it's around 15 million a year. Which, we also take into account what Stephen Boyette estimates on building permits. So yes, that would definitely affect that rate if you were to halt construction.
So, yeah, halting, but I think there's a general sentiment on the island that, the level of development of the island, infrastructure, et cetera, is not going to keep up with the development if we do a full build out. I think that we discovered that last year. And so if the interest in our population is like, hey, kind of like it the way it is, let's try and cut down on what's going on. By doing that, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, but at the same time, all these other numbers would change too.
Correct. Yep. Yep. And another thing this is based on is the value of a penny on the tax rate, right? So revenue neutral calculations are a great example. So even though your tax rate could change dramatically depending on what your property values are, this kind of holds it constant. So your basic, like even if those property values, just for ease of calculations, let's say they doubled, right? Your tax rate is not necessarily, per these calculations, going to go in half. It's going to be neutral with that growth factor included to give you that neutral amount of revenue. Okay. Other questions?
Just to me, I think the 0.75 seems a little low. Is that so? My question, is that a conservative, in your view?
I would think so. I mean, when you're talking about 14.5 million each year, and going up by 0.75 after, incrementally, I mean, that's probably 7 or 8 new homes.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe 6 or 7, just depends on the valuation of those homes at that time. So, in relative to what your growth rate is or how many homes are under construction at the time or when they're completed and you can tax them at the full value, it's all relative.
So
Fair
that's
enough.
based on 7, and we typically get 12 to 15 new homes a year. Is that pretty close? So it's twice.
And it depends on those homes' valuations, right? That's the key there.
Okay.
So with all those variables in play, this is what we would expect to see in a fund balance trend. So you would see a slight decrease here in 24 for total fund balance as a percent compared to expenditures. With slight increases going to 28, and then we kind of see this level off with a slight decrease in the later years. You can see our target fund balance per policy for total is right at 32%. So these variables in play help us meet that goal.
One of the things that. So when I'm looking at, going back to legal fees and legal fees unspent fall back into the general fund.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and right now we have a contingency of,
Built into the budget, yes,
it's built into the budget.
opposed, yeah.
This tracking is maintaining a contingency.
Yes, sir.
um,
At that universal growth rate.
Right, okay,
And also, where was I going with that? There's another assumption there in that you're not going to need to use any of that contingency through the year. So it's fully calculated and modeled as rolling back into fund balance each year. So any deviation from that, if your expenses do go over, you have to pull from that, will change the model slightly.
That's not an insignificant detail, right? Anything we don't spend goes back into it, right? I mean,
That's
so,
right. Yeah.
so you're saying this model then contemplates not spending $750,000 this year and going forward at the universal growth rate.
Correct.
Yeah, we either need to footnote that or rerun the model, because I mean, we've never had a contingent, but we've only recently started to have a contingency.
right,
And we've never not spent it. I mean, it's only one data point, but I'm saying like,
right.
I don't think you could put together a model and go, assuming we don't do something in the budget, well then, yeah, assume everything we're not gonna do in the budget. We're gonna fix this overnight. So.
Right. And again,
Yeah.
any variable you change is going to change the model excessively, right? Like we can take out the contingency and have a straight decline, right? You know, it's from.
We
And I-
just need to annotate it the same way, because that's not an immaterial thing, that this model is representing $750,000 in this budget that we propose not being spent in the coming year. And in subsequent years, it's still being budgeted and growing at a universal growth rate. Okay, unless we're gonna do that for other line items, that's right?
Yeah.
Are you following me?
Fair enough.
No, I'm
Yeah,
following,
yeah,
but if you're assuming that you're not hitting the contingency, this should be jumping faster than it is.
It all depends on the personnel, the operating and the capital costs that are built into it also. So the personnel costs are increasing at the, 4% COLA, 4% merit, and you continue that going forward. Or whether you drop those amounts, again, they're all variables in play. Personnel is our largest cost. So obviously a 4% and 4% increase is going to be much larger than a 0.75 increase toward operating or capital expenses, right? I mean, again, we can model this out for 20 years and, change one number in that 20 years and it changed the whole future forecast. So it's all variable based.
Zach, was there a reason why you assume the contingent funds would go back in and not be spent? Was there some rationale that we haven't heard?
Other than we would assume that the village will be able to operate at what we budget based on our current budget practices. And those are reflected in you know, like budgeting for the gap funds, those expenses that we know are coming. We're gonna start budgeting for, like to have that expense in there, as well as legal fees, like we're, I think it was said during last year's process. If it's coming down the line, we need to budget for it, right? So that's the kind of the idea that we had going forward with this budget.
So you said you have a confidence in the budget, contingencies there, in case of some completely unforeseen issue.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So that you don't have to draw on fund balance any more than you have to, right? To help with those emergency expenses if you needed them. I'd compare it to an insurance policy. I mean,
I guess I would ask before we get back together and look at this, if you'd run it again without the contingency in there, like assuming we spend it because we're, you know,
so we want to see,
collecting it from folks.
just for my clarification, we want to see what the model would look like if we ran 100% contingency out every year. Okay. Just going back into this, so this just breaks out the different types of fund balances. These and the amounts based on the amount of the dollars associated with those. You can see the unassigned here remains relatively flat this year based on last year with those slight increases with the contingency included as not being spent.
So same on this one. I would make the
It's
same.
just a breakout of that chart that you just saw.
Yep. But so it would change commensurately with the other when we take the.
Any change we make to any variables, going to change these.
Zach, what are the thresholds or like our peer municipalities? Like what do they target for a general fund balance and then an unassigned balance?
So now, as far as what the individual municipalities target, I have no idea. But what the LGC says for our peer groups of similar budget sizes, total fund balances are based on 46%. But our policy for total overall, the minimum amount is 32% with a 16% for unassigned.
Okay. 16% is what we have in our policy signed, or that's what the LGC recommends?
No, there's not, that's I guess a misconception that's been with the LGC for a while, that there's not a minimum recommended amount.
Right.
The average peer group amount is that 46%, which I'm assuming that's what they like to see the market trend, and that's what they compare to.
I guess what I was asking is, does the LGC have a peer group standard for unassigned fund balance?
Now that I don't know, it's not in the,
It's not in their guidance.
well, it's not in the financial performance indicators of concern workbook that they send out annually for us to enter data.
And the target that you have in your charts is what percentage?
So can you go back one? Yeah, I'll take it. So for total fund balance overall, that includes restricted and unrestricted, it's 32% minimum. And then for unassigned fund balance, it's 16. Which essentially the breakdown there is 32% of your expenditures is approximately 4 months of cash on hand. And then the unassigned balance, about 2 months.
And then the same on this one. This has the contingency baked in is going back to the general fund. So this would
They're all based on the same.
over time. Yeah.
Yes. Good load.
Okay, all right. All right, so I'm gonna take it over again and we're gonna go to the utilities fund.
Yeah, before you do that, going forward, the modeling, so make sure I got what you were asking for. My understanding is you're gonna take the contingency out of this modeling
I'm gonna shift it to an expense. So actually, right now, it's not included as an expense. So any,
Right now, the way it's set up is just the contingency is not being hit at all, and it's just increasing the general fund every year.
correct.
And so okay. And rationally, if you have a contingency and you start building a history of not having to hit it, you start reducing your contingency because it doesn't make sense. I mean, so there's a part of me that if this rationale of continuing the contingency, if you're gonna do that and you're not hitting it, that it should be decreasing because theoretically, right?
Your contingency line items is what you're,
That's right.
yep. If you decreased it,
Or there's a balance between what you're trying to maintain with the contingency relative to the tax rate. Where you can maintain the level of the contingency, but you can lower the tax rate.
Well, one or the other, yeah. I mean, one is, yeah, I mean, you're reducing the tax rate. That means you're hitting the contingency to offset costs.
those later years.
Later, yes.
Later years, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's gonna be a point in time where, yes, you're gonna be hitting those contingencies. If the variables stayed the same and carried over from, this point in time to those future years, where you could possibly, if you lower the tax rate or that value of a penny to that amount, you'd have to hit fund balance and your contingency. So there's just, it's like a soundboard type thing.
Contingency is just never have monies for unsuspecting things. And as we develop more history, we get theoretically that those expenditures that we weren't planning for are all of a sudden included in our overall budget. So the contingency, the fear is not as big.
Wasn't there a standard percent of your budget you apply for the contingency?
So you can have statutorily up to 5% of your general fund, or any funds amount budgeted for contingency.
Okay.
This model and what the 705,000 is based on is a starting point of 4.25% of total expenditures, not including contingency funds.
So it's our contingency plus 4%.
No, I think the contingency represents 4.25% of our overall budget.
So we can have a line item of contingency of 4 point whatever it was percent.
We do.
And then we also have a line item that's contingency right now.
No. It's all in the same. So,
Same, okay.
so that contingency amount that is included in this book is equal to 4.25% of the budget amount, not including the 705,000. So
So we
If it's-
have, so you're saying. I'm sorry, I'm being dense about this.
no, you're fine.
We
So if
have-
it's 17.3 million and we're budgeting 700,000 for contingency, then that 700,000 for contingency is based on 16.6 million. So that should be equitable to 4.25% of 16.6 million. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think to get at I think where you're going with this is, as we continue to evolve, as we continue to get a better handle on the legal fee issue, as you tend to get a better handle on as JP gets better and better at, maintaining the equipment, working on the change out of pumps and the stuff he needs to do. And Josh is settling in on the routine and blah, blah. As things become more consistent, and we can, and we're not having these ups and downs, big changes kind of stuff, then you can perhaps lower that contingency amount a little bit.
Well, that is where I was going.
Yeah. But we're not there yet, I think is what I'm hearing.
No, I don't think we are either. And I anticipate over the next few years, hopefully the transportation gets resolved, but there's something else that's going to be hanging out there that
Fair enough.
we're not planning for because we are making this transition. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Moving to the utilities fund, slide 29 here. Just provides an overall summary of the utilities fund. And note that it includes a modest increase in the rates. In the table, you can see the paying to the resident base charge for water, the current $8.13 and the new rate on down through non-residential tiered charge and usage, irrigation, sewer base charge, and debt capital surcharge. There's no utility debt service specifically. So we paid off that note some years ago, but we are reinvesting in with refurbishments of our lift stations. The overall budget, an increase of $865,000 from the previous year, with the majority of that by way of a transfer of $635,000 for the lift station phase 3 project, and then increases in operating costs of $240,000.
Where does, 38 million plus or minus for the upgrade of the plant, where does that fall when it happens? And where does it show up in a chart like this?
Doesn't, yeah.
Doesn't yet. We know we're doing the asset inventory assessment
Right.
on the water and sewer that will funnel into a rate analysis to factor or derive what future rates might look like.
So when we get our final, actual cost of upgrading, increasing the size of our plant, then we're looking at, the debt surcharge all of a sudden changes drastically and our rates would reflect that. So it's all within the, utilities fund. It doesn't start hitting our general fund.
And there's other variables we're looking at with potential earmarks, grants, low interest.
Well, whatever we can do to make that number as small as possible. I get that. Okay.
Chris, question on the lift station project.
Yeah.
When I go back and look at originally, there were 3 phases to the lift station project, right? We funded one in fiscal year 22, funded one in fiscal year 23.
Yeah.
The third phase was supposed to be funded, or originally was contemplated to be funded last year, and we put nothing in the budget for it.
Right.
That project has changed over time, right? We started and it was going to be 5 substations over 3 years. Now we're doing 3 per year over 5 years. Right? These were coming at $500,000 clips, right? So first 2 were 500,000-ish, give or take, right? So when we, at the outset of this project, we thought we were going to replace 15 substations for $1.5 million, about $100,000 each. Now that it's going to 5 phases, right, of $500,000, we're going to be, and I get, I mean, inflation kicked in there and stuff like that, right? I guess I'm asking the logic for, we haven't even done this, or maybe I'm not current on it, but I don't think we've done the work that we thought we were going to do in 22 in its entirety yet, or in 23 yet. So it's probably not fatal that we passed on it last year. Why are we putting it in now? Should we get through those first 2 phases before we start reconsidering funding for this? And should we rediscuss this entirely as a project, right? Because the scope and the expense, the timing, everything else is, right, it's expanded a lot from what we originally contemplated. And I know we had COVID in there and a lot of intervening things for why. But I know we've had a lot of conversation about this before. If we thought these were urgent back in fiscal year 22 or 21, when we were actually voting on it, it's, they don't self-heal, right? So do we need to reprioritize this with urgency, and do we need to have a a session where we talk about this more or?
I asked
Anyway.
Pete to
Yeah,
talk a little bit about
I
that.
get exactly that. There's a lot of moving parts to this.
yeah,
Why did it change from 3-year to 5-year? Because when we first bid it, we thought the bidding was gonna come in lower. We were looking at pre-COVID prices.
yep,
When it was bid, we realized that it wasn't gonna, the highest one came in at $500,000 per unit.
right,
And then we had some that were lower and it came in at 150 per unit.
yep,
So looking at trying to keep the same amount of money that we were using to pay back the loan for that had been previously paid in
Yep.
January of 20 or 21, we looked at that, using that same amount and reinvesting it each year into the program.
Yep.
So that was the limit factor to the $500,000 a year, 600,000 a year.
Yep.
Was that amount of money that we were spending into paying back the utility when it was bought.
Yep.
So stepping back again, initially, we thought that each lift station would be less expensive than it was.
right,
Taking into COVID and then since COVID, looking at supply line challenges, things have been held up beyond our control.
yep,
So that's how we gotten to that point. How we went from a 3-year to a 5-year was just the first bidding, the first round of bidding drove us there.
yep.
Keeping the same, we wanted to use the same amount moving forward, not to increase rates at the time.
Sure.
Now,
The answer,
It does. So, and by the way, your team's doing great work on it, right? I've gone with you and looked at it and that type of thing. But this is one of those things when we talk about modeling and what's unexpected and what's not. When we initiated this project, if you go back to the original plan and what we asked people to approve in our budget, we asked effectively for $1.5 million in 3 years to get this done. What it's looking like is it's gonna be more like $3 million in 6 years to get it done. So we've doubled the price and the scope of the project. And not we, you know what I'm saying, like circumstances doubled it versus what we originally contemplated. At this point, we funded leg 1 and 2 and 3 years ago. And now we're talking about, okay, are we gonna fund leg 3 of this? You know, I don't know how that goes into your model, Zach, but like your model didn't expect $1.5 million projects to double in price and double in time in there using the UGF, right? And so this one, I think, is material enough, it's big enough that maybe we need to sit down and just kind of all get back up to speed on, you know, how big this project is and when's the appropriate time to, you know, budget for it.
just one other thing I'd like to add to your question. How do we get by with not doing as much as we thought we were gonna do?
Yeah.
We have a lot of the pumps and a lot of the pieces on island,
Right,
and we had to use some of those. So for instance, Steve Bonnet Main last year went down. We had all the parts on an island because of this project.
Yep.
So we were able to move that one forward. That was number 3 of year 1. So that's already been done. 66% of it's been completed. We're gonna go back and do the wet well portion, and then it will be completed.
got it.
So having the equipment on an island is a huge factor.
Yeah. And as you told me, right, like your team's getting better too, right? As they do them and they learn and they'll get, you know, more efficient with them as they go.
The scope hasn't changed.
The scope hasn't changed. The timing's been driven. 2 things drove it. One was the change of the years by price. And then the second part of that was supply line issues that we had no control of. We're waiting over a year for a stainless steel power box.
To be clear though, when you say the scope, we went from doing 5 and 3 years to doing 3 and 5 years. So the scope, the time and the price of the project have both doubled.
Yeah.
But yes, the number 15, the 15 pumps are still the same. But yes.
That's right.
Okay, so I just want to be clear that the
Yeah,
scope is still 15 pumps.
Right.
It's just gonna cost it's gonna cost twice as much and take 2 times as long as what we originally envisioned, you know?
but we've been made aware of this all along the way. I mean, you're new to the council. But the council's been aware of this and we made the conscious decision. We could have done them all. We could have doubled the price and done it in 3 years. But we would have had to ask the taxpayers, you know, or the ratepayers to pay another $600,000 a year. We chose not to do that. We chose to use the same amount of money we knew we were gonna have year to year to year, fund as many of these pump replacements.
Except for last year when you didn't, which would have been phase 3, which was fiscal year 2024. And so last year you didn't follow that. So yes, I'm new,
Okay.
but you deviated from the plan. And that's what I'm asking about now is we deviated from it. And so as now we're getting back on track for it. Here's the plan right there, Scott. So three phases,
Yeah,
right?
did we consciously not do one last year?
Yeah, yes. we
Yes.
did. And I think, correct, I'm trying to recall sort of the rationale on that was just,
Was the delay, the supply line delays that delayed it, that we thought we'd play a catch-up year. Try to
yes,
catch up
right.
before we bid another one out.
Because we couldn't.
I mean, some part of it was just, it was a bigger increase, right? I mean, I get it, right? We had to make a decision on what were we gonna fund and what were we not gonna fund.
But if we'd had the parts and stuff, we could have done it last year, right? Or did we make?
Didn't have all the parts. We had parts that we needed for the emergency situations.
Right.
Which is the pumps. We didn't have we weren't able to replace the power boxes or the wet wells at the time.
Because we didn't have the money.
No, because we couldn't get the pieces.
Right.
So the funding was appropriate, the pieces weren't available.
Right. That's why we didn't get it done.
Just either way, right now, you're, just an update.
Yeah, but would it help if at the next council meeting, we try to put a better
Sure.
update or presentation to sort of hammer through this?
Yeah, I think that'd be good, just so everybody knows what to anticipate and when it'll come down.
JP, this ties along with what you and I talked about recently about, some sort of chart, lift station by lift station, what needs to be accomplished by when, right? So that we all have a much better understanding of what you're hoping to accomplish based on the availability of parts, funding available, blah, blah. And then what happens when something happens and the parts aren't available, so stuff gets pushed out, whatever, but or if our approval of monies affects the timing of that thing, which I didn't think it was the problem so far, so.
Yeah, and JP, so you're saying we have the parts, so the funding that we put in place, it's not that you're not spending it. You're spending it and buying parts, and we're not executing.
Paid on the parts side, and we have some parts we're still waiting on, but we haven't paid all the labor out because we don't have all the parts to do the labor.
Yeah, I get the labor. Okay, so, okay, good.
Karen, I'm trying to, thanks. Let's see here, this is slide, looking at our utilities revenue. And bulk of revenues generated from water and sewer services of island customers on the water service of 1 million and on the sewer service 1.3 million. Probably with water and sewer tap fees of water tap fees of 335,000 and tap fees on the sewer side 503,000. That's estimated on approximately 38 new taps between coordination with utilities and development services on projections for the year. The other notable item here is the fund balance appropriation of 482,000, which will go to a portion of that will, or that amount will supplement the funding for the phase 3 lift station refurbishment and completion of the radio read meter project.
So going back to Scott's question about when you're talking about funding phase 3, phase 2,
More pay.
is that,
So we've set up project funds for each of those, and we'll need to set up a project fund for phase 3 to move those funds into that, to allocate for the materials, labor.
well, I guess the question is, if we're looking at phase 3 and phase 3 in reality is never going to happen until 26, is this a time to be putting that money there?
Yeah, I would probably defer to JP.
There is a continued pullback on the electrical box supplies. They still are a year out. So if we ordered our next phase boxes right now, we'd be a year out.
Okay, so there's a need for expenditure against phase 3, even if we're not going to be executing it
Want to order
because we got to order the material. I got it.
I can't believe you can't, I mean, electrical boxes, this has been a problem for 2.5 years. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yeah,
It's real. We still have
yeah,
it.
I mean, it's unbelievable to me. Okay. Hey.
Next slide is utilities fund expenditures by account description. Just highlighting the expenses throughout the different between personnel, operating and capital outlay. Notably on the capital outlay of just a little over $1 million would include the transfer of funds for the phase 3 lift station and to complete the radio water meter system upgrades.
Where did we end up? In our discussion the other day about I forget the name of the truck,
Oh, the roll-off truck.
roll-off truck.
So,
Did we find how much it would cost to lease versus buy versus?
yeah, that was part of the problem is we just couldn't find anybody to offer a lease option.
Okay,
So it was sort of back to the 300,000 expense.
is that in here right?
No, it's not.
Okay,
Yeah, we're gonna continue to pursue
okay.
other options.
Were you able to look at, what we're offsetting? So I mean, when I look at the increase sludge hauling expenses, that's one of the things that, if we got this truck, we might not have 60K, in here. Or it might be 20K, who knows? But and did you look at, it's worth getting the truck and we're gonna finance it over X number of years and God, the 40K we're not using, that we're not spending on current expenses that we're paying island contracting or to do would offset the cost of the payment for the truck?
No, we didn't get into that detail. Focused on the lease option
Yeah,
and that didn't become viable. Sort of too late in the game to.
is that a worthwhile exercise? Is that-
Yes, we haven't exhausted all our resources yet. We're still in the middle of that exercise.
Okay,
I think,
Slow to respond because the island environment, people are reluctant to commit. I think we could find somebody, I just gotta keep.
well, I don't, I went past the lease conversation already. I'm looking at how much we're expending on operations that would be offset by actually purchasing the truck and whether that offset would pay for the truck.
yeah, we just.
Quick math, yes, but I don't have it. I don't have an itemized presentation to give you right now, but we can put that together.
Okay,
All right.
good.
I'm sorry, one last quick question. You said, increased water purchase from Brunswick County are 58,000?
Yes,
Not the rates, the budgeted amount. So rates increase annually,
Excuse me.
the county's water rates.
Yes.
That estimate, that line item is just estimated to increase by that much based on current numbers where we had the emergency repairs and had to tap that even more. Again, we're building back into that budget. True expenses that could happen.
the water that we purchase from the county.
And we're fully capturing all that in our revenues to cover that $58,000 bump. Got it. So if our increase in our water rates, if it went up, say 5%, 1 to 2% of that may have been to cover increases in Brunswick County water rates, right?
Well, I gotta rethink that. Our rates are not capturing that, excess expenditure, I don't believe.
And amplified this year though due to.
Right.
So the percentage has shifted in the current year based on the need to draw more from that, right? And we're trying to- On revenues from the current year.
You're just getting in the base charge though, aren't you? Or this service facility charge?
Yeah, the base charge is what we add to that, but our current budgeted figures, if everything hit where it was supposed to, would cover the expense.
Got it.
Is that fair to say? I mean, that's, yeah.
All right.
But that would be boiled into the base or facility charge increase, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a handle on, if our water rates went up by average 5%, how much of that was to cover the Brunswick County portion? How much of that's to do our own water treatment and blah, blah, blah. That's all I'm trying to get at. And maybe neither here nor there.
Next slide just shows that percentage breakout. Expenditures between personnel, operating and capital. Operating at being the highest at 1.8 million or 44%. Personnel, capital, total of 4.27 million. This slide we added a couple years ago that shows the breakout amongst the water and sewer separate. Slide shows the utilities fund capital outlay requested for FY 25 at a total of just over 1 million. And again, big items on that are the phase 3 lift station and feed. Conservancy. I want to do that again, can I?
Do that.
Wait, look, in reverse.
You see this? Watch.
That's unbelievable. I did that for y'all.
Right, worth the wait, that's the.
That's the only reason you came, wasn't it? You were promised slide 34.
Introducing the Conservancy, but
Well played.
Thank you, Zach.
you're welcome.
So this slide just shows the various services for which the village contracts annually with the Bald Head Island Conservancy. This is a longstanding partnership. The Conservancy will continue with the annual services, studies, research, and ongoing monitoring that, if contracted by other environmental consultants, would be more costly due to the Conservancy's on-island presence, institutional knowledge, and networking with other experts through the Coastal Barrier Research Study Center. Just some points to recognize that the total down at the bottom of 212,000, and that we parcel that out amongst the different funds. So for example, these items here are coming out of the general fund that are related, deer management, predator prey, vegetation. These items here that we're pulling from the utilities fund are specific to the village's water system with the Bald Head Woods monitoring, the aquifer study, infiltration monitoring, and then the Bald Head Woods monitoring. And then items that are specific to the shoreline or the creek, we fund out of the Brat Fund. Recognizing no need for the deer immunocontraception required, we'll just continue to monitor that with the Conservancy, as Beth had we talked about at the retreat. Yeah, so that's it there, unless there's any questions.
Just a question of how that money flows. Is it, as you guys do a study, you bill us, or just for my background? Yeah, okay.
Monthly, we add up our hours that we've worked on various projects and send an invoice to Zach.
Yeah.
When you allocate it to the various line items and expense wise.
Thankfully, they actually do it by project. So whatever our allocation is in the PO that we created at the end of the year, we just hit it for those line items associated with the various services.
Clean and easy, that's
Okay.
good. Thank you.
So from our point of view, even though you categorize these things, it's fluid. They got, so,
Get them to talk to legal.
when you allocate it to different categories, different funds, they're,
114 from the general fund, 28 from the utilities, and 71 from.
If- this year we say, look, we have, we're doing studies for a terminal groin, and we have to get, we're gonna do a battle against the Conservancy to put that in, that would go against the Brad Fund, so I'm making stuff up, but if all of a sudden we're doing studies and we want more information out of them, and it would fall under the Brad Fund, and it's either coming out of contingency, being transferred into the Brad Fund because we're asking for extra services, or if they're not performing some of these services, we take it out of the 114 or.
So each year, myself, Zach, Chris and Beth meet and we go over their proposal that is specific to each service and what.
Okay, so this is defined in hard concrete. Good, okay.
There was something if you wanted done outside of the scope of these things, we would talk about without.
Right,
I would-
and that's where I was trying to go, this would be a contingency item that we'd apply for Conservancy if we had more studies that we wanted done that were generating the scope.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
And vice versa, if there's something that they may come to us and suggest that's not already in here, then, I would come to you all to make
Got it.
that request to get the funds included beyond what's already approved here
Okay,
in the budget.
We don't careful about not putting things in there that don't need to be in there too, right? I mean, that's one thing right?
Yeah, you guys have done great. It's
Hmm.
flat. The only difference is around deer immunocontraception, really. I mean, but you guys have done an outstanding job.
Things that fluctuate from year to year that just together, but we're not gonna put in things we don't feel like we really need to do.
And we don't charge for like conversation, stuff like that. Like we have so many chats that are just, we're getting information from you all and you're getting information from us. It's more like the field work hours that. we're charging.
Great job.
good.
Looking at the stormwater fund, the slide just shows the current stormwater fund and projected fund balance at the end of this fiscal year of 410,000 based on revenues through the year. The stormwater fund summary just acknowledges budgeted expenditures that we're going to look through the fiscal year for a total of 211,000. That's ongoing with the improvement of lagoon water level monitoring and the physical benchmark with sight glasses in the lagoons. Purchase of some additional stormwater equipment with the 2019 Hurricane Florence donated funds, and then installation of the required stormwater basin at contractor services.
How much is left of the donated funds?
At 39,
Ballpark.
I want to say like
30-ish.
39,
I think it's
1,000.
lower than that. I think it's like 30,
30 something. All
but they're working on, he's not here.
right.
Poof.
Zach, I've got
Yep.
the next set of slides.
Any questions there? Okay. So we applied the model to the stormwater fund also, just to show you all those revenues coming in. Again, I'm gonna go back here. You see fund balance, we have it projected to go up about 410,000 at the end of this fiscal year. And that shows in the model. The other assumptions that we have there are that you have the operations increasing by 0.75, again, with that universal growth rate. And then that additional construction that Chris mentioned earlier for 80 grand, we've included that also, but at a reduction of 25% each subsequent year. One thing to keep in mind that I didn't mention with the model earlier was that while it does track expenses individually, the expense and the revenues are fluid, right? So they're a conglomerate. Like, so that's one thing to keep in mind. We're looking at the bottom line out the door expenditures and the bottom line coming in revenues. So it, regardless of whether they're, one goes up 10%, one comes down 20%, we're looking at it as a whole. So I meant to mention that earlier. So when we talk about, well, what if we have a stormwater retention pond project in 4 years that costs double what we're paying now? Technically, it could be already accounted for if those other expenses that we're budgeting for now don't hit at the levels we budget for. Is that fair to say? I mean, okay. And, with the model, so here's a net change. We expect it to go up by approximately 150,000 this year. And then subsequent years have a decrease built in to where you're hitting this level fund balance just a tad bit lower than where we are right now in time.
And that's not related to any specific project next year. You just,
The decrease here related to the 70,000 we're pulling from fund balance for the retention pond.
in the contractor lot or, yep, okay.
80, right?
It is 80, but the operating revenues account for 10 of that.
Okay.
Nope.
Moving into the RAP fund. It just shows the current balance and projected revenues into the 3.28 million. And the next slide is a summary. It shows some of the activities that we're going to look to do on the expenditures with our public beach access maintenance improvements. The repair and maintenance of our public beach accesses. To recognize the Marina Park and the DCM CAMA grant that we're applying for. That would be an observation deck to the living shoreline and a 25% match if the grant is approved. I think that costs about 65,000. At 25%. Then continued
So
efforts.
that's included in the budget request then, Chris, is to do the lookout tower or the lookout deck.
Yeah, our match, if the grant is approved, is included in the budget to pay for that. Our
Okay.
match, which would be.
If that weren't approved, then would that be something we would return back to the general fund, or would that be something we would just do a lesser project? Like
Brat fund.
Or I'm sorry, the Brat fund, sorry, would do or would we just do a scaled down version?
Yeah, well, good question.
Basically, would we reapply that money elsewhere?
Well, no, he's saying if we don't get the grant, we're gonna still do the project.
Right.
And so what we estimate the total cost of the project is about 200 and what's 75% of 65,000 is 25%. What was the estimated? Wasn't it? It's 250.
The project.
The CAMA, the Marina Park walkway and observation dock was like 200. It's somewhere a little over 200.
Right.
So the question is, would we still do that? Then we would have to fully fund it from the Brat fund at that cost.
Okay, so,
And that is not budgeted in here.
right, so what do you have in the budget, I guess is what I'm asking for that project?
The 25%.
25% of it, okay, I got you. All right,
The application is written for two.
Okay, so the application was.
so 50K, I got you, all right.
And that would be something, if we don't get the money, it's gonna come before the council to say, hey, look, we didn't get the money. This is how much it costs. This is how much is in
You
the
want to
budget.
proceed?
And are we gonna do that this year or no, or whatever?
Right.
So, and if we choose not to, then it goes back into the fund and. Okay,
65,000 will go back into the Brat fund, right?
We'll go back one. I want to clarify something because I don't want the numbers to get misconstrued. So FY projected revenues. Just a second about accommodation tax projections. That projected revenue also includes the interest earnings that we brought in, as well as that FEMA payment that we got also. So that's our projected number at the end of June that we'll have in the,
How big was that FEMA payment?
it was about 393, almost 400.
That was big. Okay.
Additional considerations of BRAT funds we're budgeting for continued efforts with our beach nourishment project. And we're permitting through the permitting stage, so we're gonna get we're heavily involved in the bidding, awarding. And the big part of that cost is for construction observation and management, and then project reporting and our FEMA engineered documentation, we haven't requested funds yet from the BRAT fund to move into that project fund, but will be coming at some point soon.
I zoned out. I apologize.
That's okay.
I was looking at accommodation taxes. Sorry.
Okay, all right. We can move. One last thing, we'll move to that. The Hardened Structures efforts are also, there's some funding in there to account for. Okay.
This is what I zoned out for.
All
Sorry.
right.
So just, you all kind of seen a version of this chart when we were at the retreat. This one is just updated to include the Q3 revenues that we received in the current fiscal year. They came in at about 30,000 higher than what we estimated. But overall, using the same number for Q4, which is an average based on the prior 4 years here, we're estimating about $2,055,000 collected in accommodation taxes, which, you know, while it is a decrease of 4.1% from the prior fiscal year, you see our trend line is still continuing upward, and I expect this to kind of level out over time. But, you know, we have to wait and see how time marches on and how they come in.
That's a pretty distorted number when you use fiscal year 20. I just,
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is.
so if anything, it's
Pre-COVID.
very conservative.
Yes,
Well,
the
these are
estimate,
actual.
these are actuals, yeah.
Those are back to FY 20's actuals
Yeah.
Yeah,
that I guess probably what the reason the increase was COVID,
right.
and we've remained pretty consistent
Over time.
over time.
Kind of like a reset of accommodation taxes post-COVID.
Right, but I mean, even if I'm looking at those numbers, I would have come up with, a conservative number of, 300, as opposed to, anyway, doesn't matter. So I think that 2.6, you're fine.
Yeah, because those are actuals, then we just base it,
Yeah.
And even if you took an average of, got, 400, 320, so. Yeah, it would probably be 50 to 60,000 higher if you just use the last three.
Right.
Which gets you more closer to that figure. So it just
Got it.
decreases that amount you're off. But then, it goes back to that point that this will flatten out over time. And we're tracking better now, right? Because we have the new software too, so.
Take a look at the jump in Q4 between fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21.
Yeah. We should have had the can there by the barrel, everybody comes,
Donations to buy a
everybody
pair.
comes say he has to drop $1,000. Yeah, I know.
Wow.
We applied the model here so, we, with the assumptions there that accommodation taxes would grow at 2% per year. And then we included a one-time reimbursement from the GEO bond for those things that were expended up front. Talked about the transfers, and then maintaining that universal growth rate at 0.75%. So when that when that bond comes in, you see the fund balance jump up. But then over time, it kind of trends, like we were talking, flattens out. It does not take into account any potential projects that would occur on this end of the model with, say fiscal year 22, that was the next beach renourishment project. I would assume, I would guesstimate
You went right.
32, yeah, I'm just, sorry, I was pointing to the blank for the years that aren't accounted for.
22, I get you. Yep, I'm with you.
So in 32, I would, guesstimate that you'd be looking at similar expenses that would reduce that and just be a cycle over time.
Is our next, is 32 the next
32.
core dredging for us?
That would be our project,
That'll be our project.
Yeah.
When's the next core dredging is?
27
27.
and 29.
Got it. So I just,
32 though.
screw around with your model. I just anticipate, and we're working on that contract with the Corps to increase the scope for template modeling for, which will be probably an added cost to us if we want to extend the sand up to the east end. And so there will be, I anticipate there's going to be added expenses that are happening those years until we come up with a different solution.
I suspect we will learn. Eric and Chris's input, we will learn as we go through this project, what the delta is between running a project straight out till it ends, or B, running a project, stopping, extend the pipe and continuing again. What that delta looks like is gonna provide input to us and inform us about,
Yes.
right,
Right.
what those numbers might look like. Right?
Right.
Yep.
Time. This is skewed admittedly because this is the year that we created the Brat Fund. So that's why you see that large increase here. But, and then again, in 26, when we do that one-time reimbursement, you see a jump here, but we expect that fund balance number to remain relatively flat.
Okay. We've been saving on for our questions.
Do you think we are from to the tree planting in 10 minutes?
Oh, my goodness.
Those sessions that we are needs a heads up.
What?
So she's asking, there's a tree planting in 10 minutes, and then we also have a closed session issue with our attorneys that we gotta give them a heads up on.
Do we expect the tree planting will take?
Not very long, maybe.
Or recess,
Gotcha.
Okay.
You want to take a recess?
And what's your stop?
recess, it comes.
Well, I'm good to.
Just take a break?
Might suggest we take a recess, like it can be now or 5 till, that way you can go out front. Cause the plantings are out front, right?
They're right.
You can go out front and do that, and then after we can come back and reconvene. For any last follow-up discussion to conclude and wrap up the workshop. Then at which point we can get legal, go into closed session.
Okay.
So closed session about what, 1:15?
Well, it just depends on how much follow-up discussion,
Yeah,
questions on the budget might take. I'd like to just get a little bit of direction in terms of I know there's been discussion on the legal line and the ROFR.
Yeah, let's do this. Let's do it, after the break.
Yeah.
But I think, we've been asking questions all along. And so I think it's a productive way of doing it. It's like for you to do a reality check, say, I think this is what you're asking me to do. And that'll generate questions or not.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let's reconvene after the tree planting.
I'll make
Direction we need.
a break. Make a motion for,
Can I get a motion for a break?
So moved.
second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. 1:15. I think where we left off, Chris, I'd like you to just do an outline of what you perceive as the duties to do right now, and then we got a couple of questions.
Okay, so just to gauge or get direction in reaffirming one, so overall, any changes to what was presented that would affect the draft in our preparation, Zach and I and staff for the May 19th council meeting, that the tax rate is 0.069 and that, increase, yes, increase. Zero.
Not the rate.
Sorry. And then the other item is to revisit the ICE daily fees for class 4 and 5. Other than that, there were some other things, but and I'll go through that I thought more of follow-ups with staff, which would include the ROI on the roll-off truck lease versus purchase if possible. I'll follow with JP on that. What I would like to suggest is, for the purposes of next month's public hearing, that we're not going to necessarily include those modeling slides. That just gets too into the weeds. But obviously want to have some follow-up based on Scott's comments about looking at the variability with the contingency and running the model without. That we could do that at some point.
Yeah, I don't know. How many people are there people with us online?
No, sir.
So nobody's with us.
Nobody's with us.
Okay. Yeah, then that's fine. The concern would be the continuity. If somebody saw something here and we run a different, and then obviously we should show it. But if nobody else is joining us online, then.
You're talking about as far as council.
Yeah.
Emily,
She was on for a while. I think she might join us for the closed session.
That's all. Sorry.
and recognition of improving on our updates on the lift station refurbishment project details at a future council meeting. And then also following up on parking and storage demand at contractor services, which I'll follow up with JP on that. So again, only really two things relative to budget and preparation for next month's meeting.
Okay, so go.
Yeah, seeing this for the first time, seeing the 12% increase, I was hoping it wasn't going to be that high. We made a big jump last year in large part to bring worker pay up to snuff. That was a big part of the jump, and as well as the contingency, which a large part of which was to cover legal fees, anticipation of legal fee expenses. So, Chris, I'd like to ask if, my thinking would be, and based on the $1.9 million increase, over 15.4, every percent increase equals about $154,000.
187.
On the,
187,000. I'm sorry, I'm talking tax rate.
yeah, I'm just talking about in the percentage increase.
Got you.
I want to start there and then let the tax rate be what it is. Instead of going for a 12% increase, for example, I want to challenge you and staff to think about an 8% increase. And what would that mean to a number of these line items? Can we cut the contingency by some portion of the 4.2? Can we cut the max merit by a point? And are there other things in here where we can work that number? By my math, we're talking about $600,000 reduction of the 1.9 million to get to an 8% tax increase. That's still going to be a tough sell for a lot of people. I'm telling you, we caught the Dickens last year. And we're still catching it. We had people present a petition now, granted, it was all relative to the legal fees, but the fact of the matter is we made a big jump last year to do what we think's right. And my number one goal, and you guys hopefully remember talking, and maybe not Scott may not have been here or heard this, but we wanted to get the employee pay where it needed to be. And we made a big jump. And so, yeah, and we accomplished that goal. So I would throw that out there. I don't know if the others feel like 8%, getting to 8% is too big a drop. If you feel like you want to leave it at 12, I mean, I'm open to what others have to say, but my sense is that, coming back in with a double-digit increase 2 years in a row is not a good thing to do.
I would, say, I wouldn't put a number like 8% on it, but I'd like to see single digits. So-
Yeah, that's where I was,
Okay.
you know, 8% might be, but the charge is to try and get it into single digits.
Right.
And if you can get down to 8, wonderful. And but so I have a buck, and I have, this as a taxpayer and, on council, there's certain expectation of what we think this island should be like, what it should be doing. And, I don't, it costs money. So there's a reality check that, I say, well, I want you to get it down to 8%. I don't want to get down to 8%, be lying to ourselves that it doesn't cost that much.
Right.
It does. And so when we're looking at, cutting expenses, try and get the number down to 8%, we're demanding on you to raise a flag and say, yeah, I can get it there, but
Right.
nobody who's paying taxes is going to be happy about it. So there is a fine line and, I'm looking for a judgment call on your part to be the, umpire when we're doing things like this.
And, if going along the process, you want to reach out to us and make suggestions and sort of run up the flagpole, see how people feel. That might help in advance of the meeting, so we don't come into the meeting with all of a sudden it's all new information.
Being between you all,
Yes.
right? Yeah, because I didn't know if this would warrant trying to have a second workshop to follow up on this.
Well, you're gonna have to tell us. I mean, I think that, to try and get down to a number like that, if you think we need a second workshop or a brief meeting that says, this is where we took it out, just so you know. Or if we can do that informally, and then we, convene amongst ourselves on a one-to-one basis.
I mean, obviously, I'd like to see us be more aggressive than that. I'd like for us to have a bigger conversation about, it's less about, for me, about the absolute dollar that we spend and the priorities of the things that we're spending on. I know I raised the roads issue because I know when I met with you guys previously, I talked about that. We got a lot of construction going on and a lot of patching that needs to be done. And I think what we said was 12 or 14,000 bucks. I don't think that'll patch what is a gaping hole in the road right now. So, and at the risk of being accused of talking out of both sides of my mouth and saying there's some things that we need to make strategic investments in, and I'd like to see the expense go down. That's one, right? That we know at some point we're gonna have to redo roads. There's no money for it. You brought up the plant. There's no money for that right now. There are big multi-million-dollar expenses coming down the pike. The lift stations is gonna be considerably more than what we thought. Those are all non-negotiable, right? Those are
Right.
just table stakes that we got to do. But to get there in any reasonable way, we have to reprioritize, some of the things that we're chasing. Obviously, I'm invested in the legal expense. I think we're overreaching there, and I think there's a way to pull back from some of that. But, again, reasonable minds could differ. So I join you. I want our island to look the way we want it to look. But the other thing that, I just don't think we're giving JP the resource for it is the parks still look, pretty rough, pretty abysmal. They've been, in the past. And I think people want to see that improved. So again, at the very real risk of talking out of both sides of my mouth and saying cut expense, but also give more money there, I'd like to see the parks improve again, And if we learned anything from the whole, commercial development, master planning, everything else, the single most reference thing that people said was we need to do more around conservation. And I know we contemplated the walking trails and things like that, but we're not making any movement on that, right? The second most oft cited thing in that survey was parking. And factually, we'll have fewer parking spots this year than we did last year, right? Because some have come off the books. So, I just worry that we're getting a little bit misaligned with what we're hearing from people and what we're delivering. And I get it. We're at a little bit of a different stance on the legal piece, but I would like to see some priority put to those items. Certainly, the parks and the infrastructure, particularly the roads, and any kind of conservation efforts or moving towards securing some of that land for set aside or walking trails or anything like that. And at the same time, I know the very easy things and shrink expenses, so.
All right. Yeah, and I think, you're talking about walking trails and nature, et cetera, and I think that's, it's my attitude toward those is I don't want to be, when people say those things and there's a vagueness about it. And I think the last thing that I put out about the medians and upgrading, basically a census of the state of our affairs.
Yeah.
I think the expenditures that you're talking about, I think those are next year. And I think this year, the expenditures are planning what we're going to do the next year.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about, I think we can be proactively looking at, it's like, look, I want to have at least 30 grand in here for trying to put together a game plan. And not 200 to do walking trails. I'm exaggerating on both sides. But yeah. I have so our point of view, looking at where you cut expenses, I think that, looking at last year's legal fees and saying, oh, that's going to be this year's legal fees plus we're going to contingency. There's a part of me that's, we're being really conservative because I personally don't think that, or I want to prepare, but at the same time,
Looking at contingency, merit, COLA, legal fees, we might be able to get down to that.
Right.
Digit.
We get down to none.
Right.
With the caveat that you don't want to find yourselves in the same situation you were last year where you're hitting fund balance even more and going further into the hole.
Exactly.
Those are the moving parts you're gonna have to play with, right?
There are moving parts. And
Then there's unknown.
yeah, no, I know. I mean, I have a handful of unknowns that I have rolling around my head right now but I think the things that you listed before we spoke, and then you look at what we just talked about. I just would like to know what the impact would be.
Yeah.
If you tell me as well, this is great, we can get what you want, but you're gonna only have, $100,000 in your contingency. And there's no way you got, throw some reality back at us. I do think that, our general fund, we hit it pretty hard over the past couple of years. And we're calling something a contingency with the notion that it rolls back into the general fund if we don't use it. And at least my perception of contingency right now is there's a certain amount of, hey, we're paying dues that need to be paid and we need to be building up the general fund again. And so ideally we have contingency there and it's substantial enough that we are throwing a couple $100,000 back into our general fund each year.
Couple 100,000 versus 705,000.
Big gap.
Yeah.
But, I think you have a target that we just gave you. See what that implies. And it's also one of those things, it's just, if you find yourself next Tuesday, call. This isn't something that, this is your problem. We'll see you next month. This is all of our problems. So you should be including us in your frustration.
Because we got this, 1, 2, 3 weeks to the 17th
Okay,
council meeting. But I have to have the budget message done on the 10th.
No, the third. I'll have it out on Friday, next Friday.
Okay, but irrespective of this, I mean, okay, we'll talk on that.
I mean, it may warrant having a public hearing apart from your regular hearing, or your regular meeting. The budget calendar was done with that in mind of meeting the statutory requirements of having the budget out to the public 10 days before the public hearing.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we fluctuate, it would be with the public hearing coming after the May 17th council meeting.
If need be.
well,
You have that option.
just know that that's a possibility, but let's shoot for the targets we have.
I'm not obviously gonna sit on this.
Yeah.
And
You're ready to work.
And after enough, I'm sure you guys know this. I mean, these guys have been working through weekends to get.
Oh, yeah.
Appreciate it.
No, let me,
Really
met with me separately to bring me up to speed.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, could I get any more questions? Could I get a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, thank you.